This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've never told this story in full before, and even writing it now, I feel my hands shaking. The memories still feel so raw, even though decades have passed since my first encounter. It was 1986. I was just 3 years old when my parents, both military, were transferred to a base in Quebec. We moved to this little francophone town nearby where they bought what looked like a totally normal house. You know, one of those cookie-cutter designs from the 70s or 80s that all kind of look the same. Nothing special about it from the outside, nothing that screamed, "This place will torment you." I remember my cherry red bed so clearly. Mom had let me pick it out myself because she thought it might help me adjust to the move. It was the one thing that felt safe in that house until that first night. I woke up suddenly, not sure why. My room was dark, but not completely. There was always a bit of light coming in from the hallway nightlight. But that night, I noticed this weird patch of darkness right in front of my bedroom door. At first, I thought maybe the nightlight had burned out or something. But as I kept staring, my eyes started to adjust. That's when I saw it. It wasn't just darkness. It was a figure, completely black, like a silhouette, but not flat against the wall. It was standing there, three-dimensional, about 8 feet away from me. It was shaped like a person, but there were no features, no eyes, no mouth, just this pitch-black outline. I remember giggling at first. I was just a kid, right? I thought maybe it was a shadow from my toys or something in my room. I even waved my hand around, thinking it would move the shadow. But it didn't. That's when I realized this wasn't a normal shadow. It wasn't on the wall. It was just standing there in my room. Then it moved. It didn't walk, though. That's what really freaked me out. It kind of disappeared and reappeared, but closer to me each time, like when you blink and something shifts position. It would be in one spot, then suddenly it was a foot closer, then another foot closer. Each time it moved, my heart beat faster, until it was right beside my nightstand, right next to my bed. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I just yanked my blanket over my head and pushed my face into my pillows, squeezing my eyes shut as tight as I could. But that didn't help. Somehow, and this is the part that still messes me up, I could still see them even with my eyes closed. Not just the one figure anymore, but 3 of them. They were in my head like they'd gotten inside my mind, and they kept changing shape, morphing into these horrifying forms, like they were trying different ways to scare me. The message was clear: you can't hide from us. I felt like they were feeding off my fear, getting stronger the more terrified I became. I don't know how long I stayed like that, paralyzed with fear. But eventually, something in me snapped, and I just bolted. I ran screaming down the hall to my parents' room, crying and babbling about the man in my bedroom. My mom tried to calm me down, stroking my hair and telling me it was just a nightmare, but it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. I kept insisting, "He's in there. He's in my room." I was hysterical. I remember my dad exchanging this look with my mom, like they were trying to decide if this was just normal kid stuff or something more. Eventually, they walked me back to my room. Dad flipped on all the lights while Mom held my hand. They checked under the bed, in the closet, behind the curtains, all the usual places parents look to show kids there are no monsters. But they didn't understand. This thing wasn't hiding in my closet, it was just there, in the open, but they couldn't see it. My mom was Catholic, so she said a little prayer with me and even tucked a small crucifix under my pillow. "This will protect you," she whispered. I wanted to believe her so badly. They left my bedroom light on that night and kept the door open, which helped a little, but I still felt watched. The next morning, everything seemed normal. The sunlight filled my room, and the shadows were gone. My parents probably thought I just had a bad dream, and honestly, I started to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe it had been my imagination. But I know now it wasn't. For the next few years, things were okay. We lived in that house, and life went on. I had friends, went to school, did normal kid stuff, but something had changed in me. I developed this habit of scanning rooms, especially dark ones. I never fully relaxed at night. I always slept with at least a small light on. Then, when I was 9, it happened again. I was older now, but that just meant I understood better what was happening, which honestly made it worse. I was lying in bed, reading a comic book with my little bedside lamp on. I remember yawning and reaching over to switch off the light when I saw it. That same unnatural darkness pooling in the corner of my ceiling. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just a shadow from my lamp, but then I turned the lamp off, and instead of disappearing like a normal shadow would, it got more defined. It descended from the ceiling, not like it was walking down an invisible staircase, but more like it was pouring itself down, like thick black oil moving against gravity. When it reached the floor, it took shape again, that same featureless silhouette. I was frozen. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. It was like my vocal cords were paralyzed. The shadow person just stood there for what felt like forever, and then it started that same stop-motion movement toward me. Disappear, reappear closer. Disappear, reappear closer. This time I noticed something I hadn't when I was younger. The air around it seemed to warp, like looking through heat waves rising from hot pavement, and there was this feeling, this crushing sense of dread and malice. It wasn't just a presence, it felt hostile. When it got to the foot of my bed, I finally found my voice and screamed. My parents came running, but just like before, by the time they flipped on the lights, there was nothing to see. This pattern continued as I got older. The shadow figures would appear, sometimes 1, sometimes 3 or more. They seemed to get bolder as I got older too. When I was around 12, they started appearing even when I wasn't alone. One time I had a friend sleeping over. We were up late watching movies in my room when he suddenly went quiet mid-sentence. I looked over at him and his face had gone completely white. He was staring at my closet door. I followed his gaze and there it was, one of the shadow figures, taller than the others I'd seen before, its form stretching unnaturally from floor to ceiling. "Do you see that?" I whispered, my heart pounding. He just nodded, too scared to speak. That was the first time anyone else had seen them, and it was both validating and terrifying. I wasn't crazy. These things were real. My friend never slept over again. He stopped coming to my house altogether after that. As I entered my teens, the encounters got more intense. The shadow people would appear more frequently, and they seemed more aggressive. They would get closer than before, sometimes so close I could feel a cold so intense it burned. The air would become heavy, like trying to breathe underwater. The worst incident happened when I was 16. I was home alone one evening while my parents were at some base function. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when all the lights in the house flickered and went out. Power outages weren't uncommon in our area, especially during winter, so I didn't think much of it at first. I fumbled around for the flashlight we kept in the kitchen drawer. As I turned it on and swung the beam around, I saw them. 5 or 6 shadow figures standing in a semicircle around me. They were perfectly still, but somehow I could feel them watching me. I backed up against the refrigerator, the flashlight beam passing through them as if they weren't there, yet they were clearly visible in the darkness. That's when I noticed something new. One of them had eyes. Not human eyes, but these pinpricks of dull red light, like dying embers. It tilted its head, an unnervingly human gesture from something so inhuman. Then it raised its arm, pointing at me. The others followed suit, all pointing directly at my face. I ran. I didn't even think about it. I just bolted for the front door. But when I reached the hallway, there were more of them. They lined the walls, the ceiling, like a tunnel of shadow figures, all turning to track me as I ran past. The front door seemed miles away. I finally reached it, yanked it open, and tumbled out onto our front porch. The night air hit my lungs like a shock of cold water. I gasped, looking back at the house. Through the open doorway, I could see nothing but impenetrable darkness, darker than the night outside. I ran to our nearest neighbor's house and pounded on their door until they answered. I was hysterical, unable to explain what had happened. They let me stay until my parents came home. When we all went back to check the house, the power was back on and everything looked normal. My parents started to worry about me after that. They took me to doctors, therapists, even had my eyes checked, thinking I might be having some kind of visual hallucinations. No one found anything wrong with me. One therapist suggested I had an overactive imagination combined with stress from moving around so much because of my parents' military careers. But it got worse after that night. The shadow figures would appear no matter where I was, at school, at friends' houses, even outside in broad daylight, though they were harder to see then. They seemed to be following me, not tied to our house as I'd originally thought. By the time I was 18, I was desperate to leave home. I applied to colleges as far away from Quebec as possible, eventually choosing one on the West Coast. I thought distance would help. It didn't. They followed me. My first night in my dorm room, I woke up to find 3 of them standing at the foot of my bed, that same unnatural stillness about them. My roommate never saw them, which made me start to doubt my sanity again. I've tried everything over the years: medication, therapy, spiritual cleansing, moving repeatedly. Nothing works. They always find me. The only thing that's changed is I've gotten better at hiding my reactions. When they appear now, I try not to show fear. I've read that entities like this feed on fear, so I try to deny them that satisfaction. But sometimes, like tonight, when I'm alone and writing this, I can feel them gathering. There's one standing in the corner of my office right now, watching me type. Another one just appeared by the door. I can feel the temperature dropping. That familiar pressure in the air is building. I don't know what they want. I don't know why they chose me all those years ago in that unremarkable house in Quebec. All I know is they've never left, and I'm starting to believe they never will. Wait, the one by the door is moving closer. It's doing that flickering thing, getting nearer with each blink. I can feel my heart racing even as I try to stay calm. It's right behind me now. I can feel its cold presence against my back. The screen is starting to dim, like the shadow is somehow absorbing the light around me. I don't know what's going to happen next, but... Story 2. I've never really told this story to anyone outside my immediate family. It happened when I was 5 years old, but the memory is still crystal clear. Like it happened yesterday. I'm 23 now, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. We lived in this pretty average suburban neighborhood. Nothing special about it, just rows of similar-looking houses with small lawns and the occasional tree. Our house was a 2-story with 3 bedrooms upstairs. My mom, my older brother Jamie, who was 9 at the time, and I shared the house. My dad wasn't in the picture anymore. It was a Saturday in the middle of summer. I remember because I'd stayed up way too late the night before playing video games with Jamie. He had this Nintendo system that I was obsessed with, even though he rarely let me play it. Mom had a rule that I could only use it when Jamie was around to supervise, which was totally unfair since I knew how to use it perfectly fine on my own. That morning, I woke up to an empty house. The sun was already high in the sky, streaming through my bedroom blinds in bright strips across my dinosaur bed sheets. I remember laying there for a minute, listening to the house. Usually weekend mornings were noisy, Mom making breakfast, Jamie watching cartoons downstairs. But that day there was this strange silence. I got up and padded down the hallway in my pajamas, these blue ones with rocket ships that were a little too big for me. "Mom?" I called out. No answer. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw a note stuck to the wall with a Ninja Turtles magnet. I couldn't read very well yet, but I recognized my name at the top. I figured Mom had left it to tell me where they'd gone. I went back upstairs, thinking this was the perfect opportunity to play Jamie's video games without him hogging the controller. Our bedrooms were across from each other at the end of the hallway, with Mom's room situated between them, but closer to the stairs. As I walked toward Jamie's room, that's when I noticed something in my peripheral vision. Someone was standing in the doorway of Mom's bedroom. At first, I just assumed it was Jamie. The figure was about his height, wearing what looked like the red t-shirt he had been wearing that morning. I didn't look directly at him. I was actually a little worried he'd stop me from using his Nintendo. "I'm just going to play your game for a little bit," I said casually, continuing toward his room. "I won't mess anything up." The figure didn't respond, which wasn't that weird. Jamie would sometimes ignore me when he was being moody. I slipped into his room and went straight for the TV and game console. I remember kneeling down on the carpet in front of the TV, turning on the system, and waiting for the game to boot up. That's when this weird feeling started creeping up my spine. You know that sensation when someone's staring at you? It was like that, but 100 times stronger. I suddenly realized something didn't add up. If Jamie was home, standing in Mom's doorway, then why had Mom left a note? And why hadn't he said anything when I told him I was going to play his games? As I sat there, the feeling got worse. The air in the room felt heavier, colder. I started remembering the figure I'd seen. Something had been off about it. The body looked like Jamie's, but I couldn't recall seeing his face. It had been completely shadowed, despite the hallway being well lit from the windows. The game's cheerful music started playing, but it sounded distant and wrong. I slowly turned my head to look toward the doorway, half expecting to see the figure standing there watching me. The doorway was empty, but that didn't make me feel any better. "Jamie?" I called out, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "Are you here?" No answer, just the game music and the sound of the air conditioning humming. I stood up, my heart starting to pound in my chest. I walked slowly back to the doorway and peeked out into the hallway. "Jamie, Mom?" I called again, louder this time. I gathered up my courage and looked toward Mom's bedroom doorway where I'd seen the figure. Empty. Something made me want to check, to make sure. I crept down the hallway, each step feeling like it took forever. When I reached Mom's room, I pushed the door open wider and looked inside. The room was exactly as it always was. Bed neatly made, curtains open, no one there. I checked Jamie's room again, then my room, then ran downstairs to look everywhere else. The house was completely empty. The note on the wall, which I later learned said Mom and Jamie had gone grocery shopping and would be back soon, was the only indication that I wasn't completely alone in the world. Except I didn't feel alone. Not at all. As I stood in the living room, that feeling of being watched intensified. The hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stood up. I felt like if I turned around quickly enough, I'd catch someone, something, staring at me. I remembered the figure in the doorway again, how I hadn't really looked directly at it. In my mind, I just assumed it was Jamie, but now that I thought about it, there had been something fundamentally wrong with what I saw. The proportions weren't quite right, the shoulders too narrow, the head slightly too large, and the face, the complete absence of features in the shadow where a face should be. I ran back upstairs shaking and turned off the game console. I didn't even bother to properly save or shut it down, something Jamie would definitely yell at me for later, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out of the house. I remember sitting on our front porch steps, still in my pajamas, hugging my knees to my chest and watching the street desperately for Mom's car. The summer heat was intense, but I felt cold, like I'd been dunked in ice water. I refused to go back inside, not even for water or to change clothes. An old lady from across the street, Mrs. Feinstein, noticed me sitting there alone and came over to check on me. She asked where my mom was, and I just said she went shopping. Mrs. Feinstein offered to let me wait at her house, but there was no way I was leaving that spot. If Mom came back and didn't find me, she might go looking in the house, and I couldn't let her go in there alone. After what felt like forever but was probably only about 45 minutes, Mom's car pulled into the driveway. I ran to her before she even turned off the engine. "Tyler, what are you doing outside in your pajamas?" she asked, looking concerned. I was crying by then, trying to explain what happened between hiccuping sobs. There was someone in the house. Looked like Jamie, but it wasn't. And when I looked again, it was gone. Mom was skeptical, but could see how terrified I was. Jamie just rolled his eyes and said I'd been having a bad dream or playing too many video games. But Mom took it seriously enough to go check the house, making Jamie come with her while I waited in the car with the doors locked. They came back out after checking every room, closet, and even under all the beds. Mom said there was nobody there, no signs of a break-in. She tried to convince me it was just my imagination, that I'd been half asleep and confused, but I know what I saw, or at least what I thought I saw. What's really weird is that over the years, other strange things happened in that house. Nothing as direct as what I experienced, but little things, items moving from where we'd left them, cold spots in rooms that should have been warm, the sound of footsteps upstairs when everyone was downstairs. The strangest part came later, when I was about 12. I had a few friends from school, but I noticed none of them ever wanted to sleep over at our house. When I finally asked my best friend Mike about it, he got really uncomfortable and eventually admitted that our house felt super scary at night. He said he couldn't explain it, but he always felt like someone was watching him there. Another friend, Alex, said he had nightmares every time he stayed over. I never told them about what I saw that day. When I was 15, Mom was considering selling the house, and during the process, she learned some history about it that she'd never known before. Apparently, about 20 years before we moved in, a 5-year-old girl had died in the house from some kind of illness. Her family had moved away shortly after. That revelation gave me chills, but it also confused me. If a little girl had died in the house, why did I see what looked like a boy? There was no record of a boy's death associated with our house. It didn't make sense. We moved out a few months later for unrelated reasons. Mom got a job in another city, but I've thought about that day many times since then. I've looked up every explanation I can think of. Sleep paralysis doesn't fit because I was moving around. Hallucinations from video games doesn't make sense either. I was fully awake and alert. Sometimes I wonder if what I saw wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense, but something else. Maybe a glimpse of something from another time or dimension that just happened to look like my brother. All I know for sure is that whatever I saw that day was real to me. And sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet house, I still get that feeling of being watched, and I still never look too closely at doorways when I'm walking down a hallway. Story 3. I still can't explain what happened during our family trip to New England 2 years ago. I've tried to rationalize it, but the memory of those few days still makes my skin crawl whenever I think about it. My wife Emma and I had been planning to visit my extended family in rural New England for a while. We decided to bring our 3-year-old son Lucas and my dad William along for the trip. My father and Lucas had always been incredibly close. The kind of grandfather-grandson relationship you see in heartwarming movies, always playing together and sharing little secrets. We arrived at my aunt's farm on a Tuesday afternoon in early October. The property had been in our family for generations, with some of the buildings dating back to the 1700s. The main house was where my aunt lived, but there was this charming guest house about 50 yards away where we would be staying. It was cozy and had this rustic New England feel, exposed beams, wooden floors that creaked when you walked on them, and windows that looked out over acres of farmland. My cousin Georgia is a photographer, a really talented one who specializes in abandoned places and landscapes. Her photos decorated almost every wall of the guest house. Most of them were beautiful. Old barns, foggy fields at dawn, that sort of thing. But there was one photograph hanging in the main family room, right above the dining table, that just felt off. I didn't think much of it at first. It was a black and white shot of an empty, run-down room with sunlight streaming through a large, dirty window. The light cast these long, stark shadows across the wooden floorboards, pointing toward a dark corner of the room. There was nothing overtly disturbing about it, but something about the contrast between the bright light and the dark corner made me uneasy. I remember thinking it was an odd choice for a dining room. The first morning there, we were all having breakfast together. Lucas was usually a chatterbox, especially around my dad. But that morning, I noticed he kept his head down, pushing his scrambled eggs around his plate. My dad was sitting directly in front of that photograph, trying to engage Lucas in conversation. asking him about the animals he'd seen on the farm the day before. Lucas wouldn't look up. He wouldn't even respond, which was completely unlike him. At first, I thought he was just tired from the travel, or maybe coming down with something. Kids get moody, right? But then I noticed how he was deliberately avoiding looking in my dad's direction, or more specifically, at the wall behind my dad. After breakfast, when everyone started getting up from the table, Lucas did something strange. Instead of walking around the table normally, he took this wide, deliberate arc around the end of the table where my dad had been sitting. He practically pressed himself against the opposite wall to avoid getting close to that photograph. I started watching him more closely after that. Every meal, he'd sit with his back to the photograph if possible. If he had to sit facing it, he'd keep his eyes glued to his plate. He'd rush through eating, asking to be excused as soon as possible. On our third day there, I finally decided to ask him what was wrong. We were alone in the kitchen, and I knelt down to his level. "Lucas, is everything okay? You've been acting strange at the table." He looked at me with those big innocent eyes that kids have and said matter-of-factly, "The bad man in the picture is looking at me. He's very cold, and he's not nice." My blood ran cold. I looked back at the photograph, the empty room with the sunlight and shadows. There was no man in that picture, I was certain of it. "What bad man, buddy? The picture just shows an empty room." Lucas shook his head firmly. "No, Daddy. He stands in the dark corner. He doesn't like me looking at him." I went back to the photograph and stared at it harder. The dark corner he mentioned was just shadows, but something about the way the light cut across the room created an odd shape there. If you let your imagination run, you might see the vague outline of a tall, thin figure. But that was just pareidolia, right? Seeing patterns where there aren't any. I asked my cousin about the photograph that evening. Georgia explained that she'd taken it at an abandoned farmhouse about 30 miles upstate. She said it was one of her favorite shots because of the way the light played with the shadows. "My mom always hated that picture though," she added, said it gave her the creeps. That's why it ended up in the guest house instead of the main house. I didn't tell her about Lucas's reaction. I didn't want to seem paranoid or make a big deal out of nothing. Kids have vivid imaginations after all. But I couldn't shake the uneasiness I felt every time I looked at that photograph now. Over the next couple of days, Lucas became increasingly agitated. He refused to enter the dining room alone. During meals, he'd whisper to Emma or me, "The bad man is looking at me again. He doesn't like me. He wants to hurt me." Emma thought he was just going through a phase or picking up on my own discomfort with the photograph. But I couldn't dismiss it so easily. There was something genuinely fearful in Lucas's eyes that didn't seem like make-believe. 5 days into our stay, something happened that I still can't explain. It was around 2 in the morning when Lucas started screaming. Not the normal crying of a child waking from a bad dream. These were terrified, hysterical screams. I bolted out of bed and ran to his room. He wasn't in his bed. Instead, I found him lying in the middle of the hallway, about 10 feet from his bedroom door, sobbing uncontrollably. "Lucas, what happened? Did you fall?" I scooped him up, checking for injuries. Between gasping sobs, he choked out, "The bad man hurt me on the leg, Daddy. He hurt me." Emma had joined us by then, and we carried Lucas back to our bedroom. When we turned on the light to check him over, we saw a large, darkening bruise on his right thigh. It wasn't the kind of bruise you'd get from bumping into furniture or falling down. It was a distinct mark, almost rectangular, like he'd been struck with a blunt object. "How did this happen, Lucas?" Emma asked gently, her voice trembling slightly as she examined the bruise. "The bad man hit me," Lucas insisted, his little face streaked with tears. "I got up to go potty, and he was there in the dark." My mind raced through rational explanations. Maybe he'd hurt himself on the bed frame. Maybe he'd been sleepwalking and bumped into something. But the bruise didn't match any furniture in the house, and its shape was too distinct, too deliberate. "The bad man from the picture downstairs?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm despite the panic rising in my chest. Lucas nodded. his eyes wide with fear. "He doesn't stay in the picture, Daddy. He comes up here when we go to bed." That was it for me. I didn't care if I seemed irrational or if my family thought I was overreacting. Within 5 minutes, I had packed up our essential belongings, woken my dad, and told Emma we were moving to the main house for the rest of our stay. It was the middle of the night, but I wasn't about to spend another minute in that guest house. My aunt was confused and concerned when we showed up at her door at 2:30 in the morning, but she didn't ask too many questions. I made up some excuse about Lucas having trouble sleeping in the new environment. She set us up in spare rooms, and that's where we stayed for the remaining 2 days of our visit. The next morning, while everyone else was having breakfast, I went back to the guest house alone. I wanted to take another look at that photograph in daylight, without Lucas around. The dining room was bright and cheerful in the morning sun, making my fears from the night before seem silly and overblown. But when I stood in front of the photograph, that uneasy feeling returned. I studied every inch of that dark corner, trying to see what Lucas saw, and then for just a split second, so brief I've spent the last 2 years convincing myself it was my imagination, I thought I saw movement in the shadows. Not in the physical photograph itself, but somehow within the scene it captured, as if I was looking through a window rather than at a printed image. A subtle shift in the darkness, like someone adjusting their position. I left immediately, my heart pounding. That afternoon, I casually asked Georgia about the abandoned farmhouse where she'd taken the photo. "Oh, that old place. It's been empty for decades," she said. "Local legend says the last owner was some recluse who died there in the 1970s. Nobody found his body for weeks." I wanted to ask more, to find out if there was any history that might explain what was happening, but I didn't want to alarm anyone or seem obsessed. We left the next day as planned, and I've never been back to that farm since. I've never told anyone outside my immediate family about what happened. Emma thinks Lucas had a nightmare and somehow hurt himself in his sleep. My dad didn't notice anything unusual during our stay and thought I was overreacting to a child's imagination. But I know what I saw on my son's leg. I know the genuine fear in his eyes wasn't fake, and sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I remember that brief moment when I thought I saw something move in that photograph. Lucas doesn't talk about the bad man anymore. He seems to have forgotten the whole incident, as kids often do, but he still refuses to look at black and white photographs, and he always sleeps with a nightlight. I don't have any evidence that something supernatural happened during those few days. I don't have any explanation for the bruise on Lucas's leg or why he was so terrified of a simple photograph. All I know is that I've never felt such a profound sense of evil as I did in that guest house, and I've never been able to shake the feeling that whatever was in that photograph wasn't confined to the paper it was printed on. Story 4. I still can't explain what happened that night at my grandparents' house in Willow Creek. It's been 3 years, and just thinking about it makes my skin crawl. I've searched online for similar experiences, but nothing quite matches what my family and I went through. My grandparents' house sits on the edge of Willow Creek, this tiny rural village where everyone knows everyone. It's the kind of place where nothing ever happens, which is why we liked visiting. The house itself is pretty old, built in the 1960s, and sits on a large piece of land. One side of the property borders dense woods, and there's this steep hill on the northeast corner that drops about 20 feet. You'd have to be part mountain goat to climb up or down that thing without making a ton of noise. Anyway, this happened in early March when I was 14. My parents and I were staying there for the weekend while my grandparents were away visiting my aunt in the next state over. The house felt different without them. Quieter somehow, but I didn't mind. I'd always loved that house with its creaky floorboards and the way the wind whistled through the old window frames. That particular night, I fell asleep on the living room couch watching TV. My parents were in the guest bedroom. I remember it was unusually warm for March, and we had a few windows cracked open to let the breeze in. I drifted off around 11, wrapped in my grandmother's quilt. I woke up suddenly to the sound of my parents' voices. At first I thought I was dreaming, But then I heard my dad curse under his breath. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, trying to adjust to the darkness. The digital clock on the DVD player read 4:17 a.m. "What's going on?" I mumbled, still half asleep. My mom was swatting at her arms, and my dad was doing the same. "Damn mosquitoes," he said, flicking on the table lamp. "They're everywhere. I've already got 3 bites." Now that the light was on, I could see them too, mosquitoes buzzing around the living room, way more than usual for that time of year. Mom was already heading toward the front door. "I'm opening this for a minute," she said. "Maybe they'll fly out." She unlocked the door and pulled it open. The porch light was still on from when we'd arrived earlier that evening, casting this yellowish glow over the front yard. I remember thinking how quiet it was outside. Usually you could hear all sorts of creatures. Crickets, frogs from the small pond about 50 yards from the house, sometimes even an owl. But there was nothing, just this heavy silence that felt wrong. I got up and walked over to the door, standing right behind my mom. The cool night air felt good after the stuffiness of the living room. We stood there for maybe a minute, watching mosquitoes fly out the door. That's when I heard it, a faint jingling sound like tiny bells or metal pieces hitting each other. It reminded me of the anklets some girls wore at school, those thin chains with little charms that made noise when they walked. But it was 4 in the morning, in the middle of nowhere. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. My mom tensed up. I could see her shoulders go rigid. "Get back inside, Mira," she said, her voice tight. But I was standing right at the doorway now, looking out. The porch light illuminated at least 30 feet of the front yard. There was nowhere someone could hide, no bushes, no cars, nothing but open grass. Yet the jingling sound was getting louder, clearer, like someone wearing anklets was walking across the lawn. But there was nobody there. I felt my mom's hand grip my arm, pulling me backward into the house. "Tony," she called to my dad, her voice shaking. "Tony, come here." My dad rushed over, and I saw his face change when he heard it too. The jingling sound was moving, circling around to the side of the house now. Without saying a word, my dad shut the door and locked it. He moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to look out. "I don't see anyone," he whispered. The sound continued, moving around the perimeter of the house. Jingle, 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 like footsteps, like someone or something was pacing around our home, circling us. We followed the sound through the house from window to window, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was making that noise. But every time we looked out, there was nothing there, just the empty yard bathed in moonlight and porch light, and that constant rhythmic jingling moving around us. "It's just some animal," my dad said, but his voice betrayed him. "No animal makes that sound. We all knew it." The jingling moved to the back of the house, where the hill was. That steep drop where no human could climb without struggling, making noise, disturbing the loose dirt and rocks. Yet the sound moved up and down that hillside effortlessly, jingling all the way, as if gravity didn't apply. At one point the sound stopped at the back door. I'll never forget that moment. The 3 of us frozen in the kitchen, staring at the door, listening to that metallic jingling right on the other side. The doorknob didn't turn, thank God. But something was there, inches away from us, separated only by a wooden door. I started crying silently. My mom pulled me close, her arms wrapped tightly around me. My dad grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter, holding it like he knew it would be useless. Then the jingling moved away, continuing its circle around the house. Sometimes it would fade, like whatever it was had moved farther into the yard, and we'd feel a moment of relief. But then it would come close again, right up to the walls, as if it was pressing its body, if it had one, against our home. What made it worse was the complete silence of everything else. No insects chirping, no night birds, no frogs. Even the wind seemed to have died down, just that jingling, cutting through the silence like a knife. I remember checking the time on my phone, 4:47 a.m. We'd been listening to this thing circle our house for half an hour. My legs were shaking so badly I had to sit down at the kitchen table. "Should we call someone?" I whispered. My dad shook his head. "Who? The police? It would take them at least 30 minutes to get out here, and what would we tell them? That we hear ankle bells but can't see anyone?" He was right, but I hated that we were just sitting there, waiting. Around 4:50, the jingling suddenly got louder, faster, like whatever it was had started running around the house. The sound moved with impossible speed, circling the entire house in seconds. Then it would stop abruptly, only to start again from a different spot. At one point, it sounded like it was on the roof, the metal jingling right above our heads, moving back and forth across the ceiling. My dad's eyes followed the sound, looking up as if he could see through the plaster and wood to whatever was up there. "This isn't possible," he kept saying under his breath. "This isn't possible." But it was happening. By 5 a.m., I was in a state of complete terror. I'd never experienced fear like that before. This primal, deep-in-your-bones kind of fear that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the world. My mom wasn't doing any better. She'd stopped talking entirely, just holding on to me and my dad, her eyes fixed on the windows, waiting. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the jingling stopped. We waited in silence, straining to hear if it would start again. 1 minute passed, 2 minutes, 5. Gradually, we became aware of other sounds returning. First a cricket, then another. The distant call of a night bird, the familiar sounds of the countryside at night, filling in the silence that had been so unnatural and terrifying. By 5:15, the world outside sounded normal again. It was like whatever had been circling our house had finally left, taking its unnatural silence with it. None of us slept after that. We sat in the living room with all the lights on, jumping at every normal house creak or wind gust. When dawn finally broke around 6:30, my dad ventured outside to check around the house. The ground was soft from recent rain. It should have shown footprints if someone had been walking around our house for over an hour, but there was nothing, not a single footprint, no disturbed grass, no evidence whatsoever that anything had been there. My dad checked the hill too, that steep slope that would have shown signs if someone had climbed it. Nothing. The soft earth was undisturbed. We left that morning, making up some excuse to my grandparents about an emergency at home. I haven't been back to that house since, and honestly, I don't think I ever want to go back. I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was an animal with something stuck to it that jingled. Maybe it was some elaborate prank by local kids, though nobody lived within a mile of my grandparents' place. Maybe it was a shared hallucination brought on by carbon monoxide or something. But none of those explanations feel right. Whatever was circling our house that night wasn't natural. The way it moved, up and down that steep hill, onto the roof, around the house with impossible speed. No human could have done that without leaving traces. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear that jingling sound outside my window. I hold my breath and listen, terrified that whatever visited us in Willow Creek has followed me home. And the most chilling part? A few months after this happened, I was telling my grandmother about it over the phone, leaving out how scared we'd been, and she got really quiet. When I asked what was wrong, she told me that in rural Indian folklore, my grandfather's side of the family is originally from southern India. There are stories of spirits that announce their presence with the sound of ankle bells. They circle homes at night, trying to find a way in. I don't know what would have happened if we'd opened that back door when the jingling stopped right outside it. Part of me is glad I'll never know. Story 5. I'm still shaking as I type this, even though it's been 3 weeks since it happened. I've barely slept, and I can't stop thinking about it. Some of my co-workers think we should just forget about it and move on, but I need to get this out somewhere. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it all. I'm 25 and work as a junior chief editor at a publishing company in Mumbai. Our office is in this old building that used to be some kind of warehouse before being converted into office spaces about 15 years ago. It's one of those places with exposed brick walls and industrial-looking ceilings that management thinks makes us look hip and creative. But honestly, it just feels cold and empty at night. I often volunteer for the night shift because I'm trying to impress my bosses and move up in the company. Plus, the night shift pays better, and I'm saving up for my own place. Usually there are 6 of us working these late shifts. Me, Deepa, Arjun, Vikram, Nehar and Samir. We've become pretty close over the last year, sharing food from home and playing music while we work on manuscripts. That night, Thursday, the 18th of August, started like any other night shift. We all arrived around 8 in the evening, planning to work until 6 the next morning. The office was already empty except for the security guard downstairs. We settled into our stations in the open workspace, with our computers forming a loose circle so we could chat while working. Deepa came in last, carrying this old boxy tape recorder along with her usual bag and tiffin. When we asked about it, she told us it had belonged to her grandfather who'd passed away the previous month. Her family had been clearing out his house, and she'd kept the recorder out of nostalgia. "I found some old cassettes too," she said, pulling out a plastic case with a faded label. "I thought it might be fun to listen to something different tonight instead of Spotify." We were all curious about this relic from the past. Most of us had grown up in the digital age. I barely remember cassette tapes being a thing. Vikram, who's into vintage stuff, was particularly excited and helped Deepa set it up on the empty desk in the middle of our workspace. "It's a Panasonic RQ2102, Vikram announced proudly, as if identifying some rare archaeological find. These were really popular in the 80s. The tape Deepa had brought was labeled Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, the soundtrack from that super popular Bollywood film from the 90s. Her grandfather apparently loved those songs. We all know them by heart. They're classics that still play at weddings and parties. Deepa plugged in the recorder, inserted the cassette, and pressed play. The familiar crackle of analog sound filled the office before Shah Rukh Khan's voice emerged, singing the title track. We all smiled and got to work, occasionally humming along. The sound quality wasn't great. There was a constant background hiss, and sometimes the tape would wobble a bit, making the pitch fluctuate. But it was actually kind of nice, like a warm, fuzzy blanket of nostalgia. I should mention that our office already had a bit of a reputation for being off at night. Nothing major, just little things that make the hair on your arms stand up. Sometimes we'd hear dishes clattering in the pantry when no one was in there. The elevator would occasionally ding and open, but no one would get out. The air conditioning would suddenly blast cold air even though no one had adjusted the thermostat. We mostly laughed it off as an old building settling or faulty wiring. That night was particularly cold. I remember wearing 2 sweaters and still feeling chilled. The windows were fogging up from the contrast between the cold air inside and the humid Mumbai night outside. It created this eerie, isolated feeling, like we were trapped in a bubble separate from the rest of the world. The tape played through the entire soundtrack. Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, Ladki Badi Anjani Hai, Sajanji Gar Aaye, and the others. When it reached the end, it clicked and automatically began playing from the start again. None of us minded, it was just background noise while we worked. It was around midnight when things got weird. We'd ordered food from a late-night delivery place and were eating at our desks. The tape had just finished playing Kuch Kuch Hota Hai for the second time, and we were all expecting Ladki Badi Anjani Hai to start. Instead, a completely different sound came from the recorder. It was music, but nothing like what should have been on that cassette. It wasn't even Bollywood. It had this slow, eerie rhythm with strange string instruments and occasional deep drum beats. The melody was minor and melancholic, with what sounded like a flute or some wind instrument playing over the strings, and there was chanting. Not singing, but low, guttural chanting in a language none of us recognized. We all looked up from our food at the same time. Nehar was the first to speak. "Deepa, what the hell is that?" she asked, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. Deepa looked as confused as the rest of us. I don't know. This shouldn't be on here. It's just supposed to be songs from the movie." "Maybe your grandfather recorded something else over it?" Arjun suggested. Deepa shook her head. "No way. He was super careful with his tapes, and this doesn't sound like anything he would listen to." The music continued, growing more intense. The chanting became louder, more forceful. I felt my skin crawl with each strange note. It sounded ancient, ritualistic. Vikram got up and walked over to the recorder. "Let me try rewinding it." He pressed the rewind button, and we heard the high-pitched whirring sound as the tape spun backward. After about 30 seconds, he pressed play again. Kuch Kuch Hota Hai started playing normally. We all relaxed a little, laughing nervously. "Weird glitch," Samir said, going back to his food. "These old tapes do strange things." But after the title song finished, instead of Ladki Badi Anjani Hai, the strange music started again, exactly the same as before. This time it was even louder, as if the volume had increased on its own. I saw Deepa's face go pale. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I checked this tape before bringing it. It's just the movie soundtrack." Vikram tried fast-forwarding past the strange music, but when he pressed play again, it was still there. He tried skipping to the next track, but the strange music continued. "Okay, this is freaking me out," Neha said, pushing her food away. "Turn it off." Deepa reached over and hit the stop button. The music cut off abruptly, leaving an uncomfortable silence in the office. We could hear the air conditioning humming and the distant sounds of late-night traffic outside. "Let's just use Spotify," I suggested, trying to sound casual even though my heart was racing. I opened my laptop and pulled up a playlist of upbeat pop songs. As the familiar, non-threatening music filled the room, we tried to get back to work. Deepa ejected the cassette, examining it closely under her desk lamp. "It looks normal," she said, turning it over in her hands. "I don't understand what happened." We were all on edge, but tried to focus on our tasks. I was editing a chapter from an upcoming mystery novel, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept replaying that strange music, trying to place it. About 20 minutes later, Samir got up to make tea in the pantry. He'd barely been gone 30 seconds when he came running back, his face ashen. "Guys," he said, his voice shaking. "The music. It's playing in the pantry." At first we thought he was joking, trying to scare us, but one look at his face told me he was serious. "What do you mean?" Arjun asked. "I mean, I can hear that same weird music coming from inside the pantry, but there's nothing in there that could be playing it." We all got up and moved cautiously toward the pantry, which was about 15 meters from our workspace, just a small room with a counter, sink, microwave, and cabinets for storing cups and plates. As we approached, I could hear it. Faint at first, then clearer, the exact same eerie strings, drums, and chanting that had played on the tape recorder. But there was nothing in the pantry that could produce sound. No speakers, no radio, nothing. The music seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. It filled the small room, yet I couldn't pinpoint its source. The air in the pantry felt at least 10 degrees colder than the rest of the office. Neha started crying. "I want to leave," she said, backing away. "I don't care about the shift. I'm leaving." None of us argued. We quickly gathered our things, not bothering to shut down computers properly or tidy up. Deepa hesitated by the tape recorder. "Leave it," Vikram said firmly. "Just leave it." And she did. We practically ran to the elevator, none of us wanting to be the last one out. The ride down to the lobby felt agonizingly slow. No one spoke. I could see our reflections in the metal doors. 6 terrified faces, pale and drawn. The security guard looked surprised to see us all leaving at once in the middle of the night. When he asked what was wrong, we mumbled vague excuses about not feeling well. How could we explain what had happened? It sounded insane even to us who had experienced it. I couldn't sleep when I got home. I kept hearing that music in my head, and every noise in my apartment made me jump. When morning came, I debated calling in sick, but curiosity won out. I needed to know what had happened to the tape recorder. When I arrived at the office around 10, the day shift staff were all working normally. Everything looked exactly as it should, except for one thing. On Deepa's desk was the tape recorder, but beside it lay the cassette, broken open, with the brown film pulled out and tangled like some sort of twisted, shiny seaweed. Deepa arrived shortly after me, looking as exhausted as I felt. When she saw the mangled cassette, she just stood there, staring at it. "Did you do that?" I asked quietly. She shook her head slowly. "I left it in the machine." We learned later that day that the security footage from overnight showed nothing unusual. No one had entered the office after we left. The cameras in our workspace had, coincidentally, experienced technical difficulties during our shift and had no recording from midnight onward. In the following days, we tried to research the strange music we'd heard. It took some digging, but Vikram eventually identified it as a type of ancient Japanese music used in samurai rituals. None of us have any connection to Japanese culture. Deepa's grandfather had never traveled to Japan or shown any interest in Japanese music. The publishing company has never handled any books related to Japanese history or samurai culture. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. Night shift workers now regularly report hearing that same music playing softly in different parts of the office after midnight. The tape recorder sits untouched in a drawer in Deepa's desk, but somehow that music found a way in, and it refuses to leave. I died. Story 6. I still can't take baths, 23 years later, and I still shower with the bathroom door wide open and all the lights on. I can't even use the bathroom if there's a curtain anywhere near me. My wife thinks I'm being ridiculous, but she wasn't there that night in Veracruz. She didn't see what I saw. It happened when I was 8 years old. We lived in a small house about 30 minutes outside of Veracruz City. It wasn't much. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room, and 1 bathroom that was separated from the hallway by this heavy blue curtain instead of a proper door. My dad had promised to install a real door for months, but he worked 6 days a week at the shipping docks and was always too tired on Sundays. Looking back, I wish he had kept that promise. The house was old, built in the 70s, and the electrical wiring was garbage. We'd get blackouts at least twice a month, especially during summer when everyone was running their fans. Usually they didn't last long, maybe an hour or 2. But this night was different. It was late July, and the heat was suffocating. Around 7 in the evening, right after dinner, the lights flickered a few times before everything went dark. My mom immediately started lighting candles while my dad checked with the neighbors. Apparently, the whole neighborhood was without power. "I'm going to the store to get some ice before it all melts," my dad said, grabbing his keys. "Manuel at the corner store has a generator. I'll see if he knows when the power will be back." My mom nodded and handed him a flashlight. "Don't be long." After he left, my mom looked at me and wrinkled her nose. "You're all sweaty and dirty from playing outside. Go take a bath before bed." I remember protesting. "But Mama, it's dark. Can't I wait until the lights come back on?" She shook her head. "Who knows when that will be, and you're not sleeping in those filthy clothes. I'll put a candle in the bathroom for you." The bathroom was the only room in our house without any windows. It was basically a converted closet. During the day, it was already dim even with the lights on, but at night, with just a candle, it was like a cave. My mom placed a thick white candle on the edge of the sink. The flame created weird, dancing shadows on the tiled walls. She pulled the heavy curtain closed behind her, leaving me alone. "Don't take too long," she called from the other side. "And don't splash water everywhere." I quickly undressed and filled the tub, keeping my eyes on that candle flame the whole time. The bathroom felt smaller in the darkness, like the walls were creeping inward. The only sounds were water filling the tub and the occasional car passing outside. I had just settled into the water when I heard my mom's footsteps hurrying down the hallway. She called through the curtain. "Miguel, your father just called from Manuel's store. I need to run down and help him carry things back. I'll be gone 10 minutes, maybe less." Before I could object, I heard the front door open and close. Just like that, I was completely alone in our dark house. At first, I tried to stay calm. I focused on washing myself quickly, wanting to be done before she returned. But then something changed. The air in the bathroom felt different, colder, somehow denser. I noticed the candle flame wasn't standing straight anymore. It was bending slightly, as if caught in a breeze. But there couldn't be a breeze. The bathroom had no windows, and the house was closed up because of the heat. The air conditioner wasn't working without electricity. There was no logical reason for moving air. I froze, my soapy washcloth clutched in my hand. That's when I saw the curtain move. It wasn't much, just a slight ripple at first, like someone had walked past it on the other side, but I knew I was alone in the house. Then it moved again, more noticeably this time. My eyes were fixed on that heavy blue fabric when I saw it, a shape behind the curtain. Not just any shape, something blacker than the darkness around it, a tall, human-like silhouette standing perfectly still on the other side. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. I just stared at this impossibly dark figure through the curtain. It wasn't my mom or dad. It was too tall, too still. It didn't move like a person. It didn't move at all. The candle flame bent further, now pointing directly at the curtain, as if drawn toward whatever was standing there. The temperature in the room dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath fogging in front of me, despite the summer heat. I wanted to scream, but my voice was trapped in my throat. The water around me felt like ice now. My skin erupted in goosebumps, but I couldn't move to get out of the tub. It was like I was frozen in place, trapped in the water while this thing watched me from behind the curtain. I don't know how long I sat there. It could have been seconds or minutes. Time seemed to stretch and distort. What I do know is that the figure never moved. It just stood there, a perfect silhouette of complete darkness. Not a shadow cast by something else. It was like a piece of the night itself had taken human form. The moment broke when the curtain started to move again. Not like before. This time it was slowly being pulled aside, inch by inch, as if whatever was behind it had grasped the edge and was about to reveal itself. That's when I finally found my voice. I screamed, not just any scream, the kind that rips your throat raw. I grabbed the wooden brush next to the tub and started slamming it against the porcelain, creating as much noise as possible while screaming for my mom, for anyone. The curtain stopped moving, but the figure remained. I kept screaming and hitting the tub until I heard pounding on our front door. Then a voice, Senora Garcia from next door. Miguel, ¿estás bien? What's happening? I heard her using the spare key my parents had given her for emergencies. The moment she entered our house, the curtain fell back into place, and the candle flame straightened as if whatever force had been bending it suddenly vanished. Senora Garcia rushed in, finding me shaking and sobbing in the tub. I was babbling about someone behind the curtain, pointing wildly. She checked the entire house, turning on her flashlight in every corner, but found nothing. No open doors or windows, no signs of an intruder. You're imagining things from the dark, Niño, she said, helping me out of the tub and wrapping me in a towel. The blackout is making you see things. My mother returned about 5 minutes later, confused to find Senora Garcia sitting with me in the living room, surrounded by all the candles from the house. I was still shaking, unable to form coherent sentences. When I finally managed to tell her what happened, she checked the house again, but like Senora Garcia, found nothing unusual. My father arrived shortly after, and they both dismissed it as my imagination running wild in the darkness. There are no monsters, Miguel, my father said firmly. The dark can play tricks on your eyes, that's all. But I knew what I saw. It wasn't a trick of light or shadow. Whatever stood behind that curtain wasn't human, and it wasn't my imagination. The dark itself was alive and waiting for me to notice it. The power came back around midnight, but I refused to sleep alone for weeks afterward. My parents eventually grew frustrated with my newfound fear of the dark and the bathroom curtain. Within a month, my dad finally installed a proper door, thinking it would help. It didn't. We moved away from that house when I was 12, but I never forgot what happened. To this day, I sleep with a light on. I can't stand near curtains during blackouts. I've never told my wife the full story, just that I had a bad experience as a kid. How do you explain to someone that you saw darkness take form? Sometimes I wonder if it would have revealed itself if Senora Garcia hadn't shown up. What would I have seen if the curtain had been fully drawn aside? Would I have survived that encounter? The worst part is that sometimes, during storms when the power flickers, I get this feeling, this absolute certainty, that it's still out there, waiting, that it found me once and could find me again. That maybe it's been following me all these years, just waiting for another perfect moment of darkness. I know how this sounds. I know most people reading this will think I was just a scared kid who let his imagination run wild during a blackout. Maybe you're right, but 23 years later, I still remember how that candle flame bent without any wind, how the air turned cold in the middle of a Mexican summer night, how that shape was darker than darkness itself. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night and hear the rustle of fabric moving, I freeze, just like I did in that tub, because deep down, I know there are things in this world that exist in the spaces between light. Things that hide behind thin barriers like curtains, watching and waiting for moments when we're vulnerable and alone. Things that are made of darkness and want nothing more than for us to notice them. Story 7. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or demons or any of that supernatural stuff. Growing up in a practical household where both my parents were accountants, I was raised to trust in what I could see, touch, and prove. I'd roll my eyes at horror movies, pointing out all the logical explanations behind the hauntings. But what happened to me this past March has completely shattered my worldview, and I'm still trying to make sense of it all. I'd finally saved enough for a down payment on my own place, a modest 3-bedroom trailer in Pine Creek, Missouri. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. After years of dealing with roommates and their drama, I was beyond excited to have my own space, just me and my 2 cats, Luna and Midnight. The previous owners had left a few things behind, including a full-length mirror in the master bedroom. I didn't think much of it at the time. Free mirror, right? Why complain? The first day was exhausting but exhilarating. Unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, figuring out where everything should go. I remember feeling so proud as I collapsed into my bed that first night, my cats curled up beside me. This was home now. That feeling didn't last long. I woke up suddenly at exactly 3 in the morning. Not gradually, not drowsily. My eyes just snapped open, heart pounding like I'd been running. The room felt different, colder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing in the corner, watching me. I turned on my bedside lamp, but of course no one was there, just that mirror reflecting my terrified face back at me. I chalked it up to first night jitters in a new place. The next day I was tired but busy with more unpacking and setting up. That night I took melatonin to help me sleep better. It didn't help. Again, at exactly 3 in the morning, I woke up gasping for air. This time I had been dreaming, if you could call it that. In the dream, I was trying to run out of a house, but something with long, bony fingers kept grabbing my ankles, pulling me back inside. I could hear it laughing, a horrible sound that made my blood run cold. When I woke up, the laughter seemed to echo in my ears for a few seconds before fading away. This pattern continued for 5 straight nights. No matter what I did, melatonin, sleeping with the TV on, checking and double-checking all the locks, I would wake up at exactly 3 a.m., heart racing, covered in sweat, with that terrible feeling of being watched. The dreams got worse too. Always the same theme, me trying to escape and something dragging me back. Sometimes the something had a face, distorted and wrong in ways I can't properly describe. On the 6th night, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from the dread of falling asleep. The cats were somewhere else in the trailer, which was unusual since they typically slept with me. As I was finally drifting off, I heard it clear as day. Hello. A child's voice. Right next to my ear. I've never moved so fast in my life. I launched out of bed, turning on every light in the trailer, searching every closet, under the bed, everywhere. Nothing. No one. Just me and the cats, who had both somehow ended up huddled together on top of the refrigerator, their eyes wide and alert. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, just sat on the couch with all the lights on, jumping at every creak and groan of the trailer settling. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was tired and stress was making me hear things. But deep down, I knew better. The next night, I decided to stay up late watching movies in the living room, hoping exhaustion would eventually lead to a dreamless sleep. Around midnight, Luna, my calico, jumped up onto the coffee table in front of me. I reached out to pet her, but she was rigid, completely focused on something behind me. I turned around, following her gaze, and realized she was staring directly through the kitchen toward my bedroom door. Just staring, not blinking, not moving. "Luna, what's wrong, baby?" I called to her, snapping my fingers near her face. Nothing. No response at all. I even waved my hand in front of her eyes, and she didn't react, just kept staring at that damn bedroom door like her life depended on it. Midnight, my black cat was nowhere to be seen. I later found him wedged behind the washing machine, refusing to come out no matter what treats I offered. By 1 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I was exhausted, and despite my better judgment, I decided to go to bed. As I walked through the kitchen toward my bedroom, the temperature seemed to drop with each step. Standing in the doorway, I could see that mirror reflecting the hallway light behind me. For a split second, and I swear this happened, I thought I saw someone standing behind me in the reflection. I spun around, but of course, no one was there. I got into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin, feeling like a scared kid. I left the bedside lamp on and somehow managed to fall asleep. 3 a.m. like clockwork. This time was different, though. I didn't just wake up, I was jolted awake by what felt like someone sitting on the edge of my bed. The mattress had actually dipped down. I could feel the weight of someone sitting there, but when I looked, there was nothing visible. The room was freezing cold, and I could see my breath coming out in little puffs of vapor, and the pressure, it's hard to explain, but it felt like the air was being compressed. My ears popped like I was in an airplane, and I had this overwhelming sense that whatever was in my room with me was angry that I could feel its presence. I couldn't move. Not metaphorically. I literally couldn't move my body. It was like something was holding me down. All I could do was move my eyes, and they were drawn to that mirror. In the dim light of my bedside lamp, I could see that the reflection in the mirror wasn't right. It showed my room, but distorted somehow, darker, and the reflection of me in bed looked like it was sitting up, staring back, even though I was lying down. This paralysis lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the weight lifted from my bed, the pressure in the room eased, and I could move again. I scrambled out of bed, grabbed my phone and my car keys, and ran out to my car in just my pajamas. I spent the rest of the night there, doors locked, engine running for heat, too terrified to go back inside until the sun came up. That morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. This wasn't just nightmares or an overactive imagination. Something was happening in my trailer, and it seemed to be getting worse each night. In desperation, I drove to this little crystal shop about 30 minutes away. I'd passed it many times but never gone in. That sort of thing wasn't really my scene. But I was desperate for answers, for help, for anything. The shop was empty except for a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair behind the counter. I hadn't even opened my mouth to speak when she looked up at me and said, "You have a mirror issue." I felt like all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I hadn't told anyone about the mirror, hadn't even mentioned why I was there. "Excuse me," I managed to stammer out. "There's a portal that's been opened in your mirror. I can see the energies coming in and out of it, green and purple colors." She spoke so matter-of-factly, like she was telling me I had spinach in my teeth. "How did you know about the mirror?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She just shrugged. "It's coming off you in waves. Something's attached itself to you through that mirror." She recommended I cover the mirror immediately, not with a sheet, but with something more substantial. She sold me some cleansing spray, which smelled like sage and something else I couldn't identify, and told me not to stay alone in the house that night. I was skeptical, of course. The logical part of my brain was screaming that this was nonsense, that the woman was just trying to sell me overpriced sprays and crystals. but the part of me that had experienced those terrifying nights knew better. On the way home, I called my friend Sarah and asked if she could stay over. I didn't tell her why, just said I was feeling anxious in the new place. She agreed, bless her. When I got home, I immediately covered that mirror with a heavy blanket, securing it with duct tape around the edges so it couldn't slip off. Then I went through every room of the trailer, spraying the cleansing mixture the woman had given me, opening windows to air the place out, even though it was chilly outside. Sarah arrived around 7 with pizza and wine. We watched movies, laughed, talked, normal friend stuff. Neither of my cats would come out of hiding while we were awake, which I found concerning, but didn't mention to Sarah. When bedtime came, I was terrified. Sarah took one of the spare bedrooms, and I reluctantly went to mine. The mirror was still covered, and I'd sprayed extra cleansing mixture around it. I left my bedside lamp on and tried to sleep. For the first time since moving in, I slept through the night. No waking up at 3 a.m., no nightmares, no feeling of being watched. Nothing. The next day, Sarah left, and I faced the prospect of another night alone in the trailer. But again, nothing happened, and the night after that was peaceful too. Even my cats seemed to relax, returning to their normal behaviors. It's been a few weeks now. I still keep that mirror covered, and I don't think I'll ever uncover it. I've considered getting rid of it entirely, but some irrational part of me is afraid that moving it might somehow activate whatever is in there again. I don't know what to believe anymore. I was so sure about how the world worked, so confident in my non-religious, non-supernatural worldview. Now, I'm not sure of anything. All I know is what I experienced was real. It happened. And whatever was trying to come through that mirror, whatever had its eyes on me for those terrifying nights, I hope it stays where it is. Sometimes I still wake up in the night holding my breath, listening. And sometimes just before I drift off to sleep, I catch myself glancing at that covered mirror, making sure the blanket is still securely in place, because whatever's on the other side, it's still there, waiting. Story 8. I've never really talked about this before. It's been almost 7 years, but I still get goosebumps thinking about that night at my aunt and uncle's place in rural Finland. I was 16 at the time, spending the summer there like I did every year to escape the scorching heat of my desert hometown. My uncle's house was this old farmhouse surrounded by dense forest and fields. It was the kind of place where you could see every star in the sky at night, and the silence was so complete you could hear your own heartbeat. During the day it was peaceful and beautiful, but at night that isolation hit different. My Uncle Jose was this larger-than-life character who loved telling stories. Most of the time we'd all roll our eyes because he was known for turning a simple trip to the grocery store into an epic adventure with bears and mysterious strangers. He'd exaggerate everything for laughs, and we all just played along. That particular evening started out normal enough. We were sitting around the kitchen table eating fries and drinking Pepsi. My aunt had gone to bed early with a headache, and my cousins were staying at friends' houses, so it was just me and my uncle. He'd had a few beers, nothing crazy, just enough to make him a bit more talkative than usual. We were just chatting about random stuff when his tone suddenly changed. He put his beer down and leaned in closer to me across the table. I remember the kitchen light casting this weird shadow across his face, making him look much older than his 40-something years. "Marcos," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to believe me." I nodded, though I was already mentally preparing for another of his outlandish tales. When I was about your age, maybe a little younger, I was haunted by something. He paused, taking a swig of his beer. In our family, we call it El Fantasma del Toc Toc. The knock-knock ghost, I translated, trying not to smirk. "Yes," he replied, not catching my skepticism. "It started when I was 14. I would be in bed at night and I would hear it. 4 knocks on my window, always 4. Toc, 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 toc." He tapped his finger on the table to demonstrate, and I remember how his fingernail made this sharp sound against the wood. "At first, I thought it was just the wind or a branch," he continued. "But then one night I got up to look, and there it was, watching me." "What was it?" I asked, humoring him. He shook his head. I couldn't tell you exactly. It was like a shadow, but with depth, like someone wearing a dark cloak. No face that I could see, just darkness. He shivered visibly, which was unusual for him. It came back every few nights for months, always the same pattern. 4 knocks, and then it would just stand there watching. I nodded politely, but inside I was thinking this was just another of his stories, probably inspired by some Finnish folklore he'd heard from the locals. "You don't believe me," he said, reading my expression. "I don't blame you. I wouldn't believe it either if someone told me. But Marcos," his voice got really serious here, "if you ever hear 4 knocks like that, don't look out the window. Just don't." I promised I wouldn't, mainly to put him at ease. The conversation moved on to other topics, and eventually we decided to head to bed. The house only had 3 bedrooms, one for my aunt and uncle, one for my cousins, and a guest room. But my aunt wasn't feeling well and had already claimed the guest room to sleep alone, so I ended up having to share my uncle's bed since my cousin's room was being renovated. It wasn't ideal, but it wasn't a big deal either. The bed was huge, and my uncle fell asleep almost instantly. Within minutes, he was snoring loudly, still slightly drunk. I wasn't tired yet, so I was just lying there scrolling through my phone, reading some Harry Potter fan fiction I'd been following. The bedroom was on the 2nd floor of the house, with a large window overlooking the backyard and the edge of the forest beyond. The curtains were open because my uncle liked to wake up with the sun. Outside, it was that weird Finnish summer night that never gets fully dark, just a kind of perpetual twilight that made everything look slightly bluish and surreal. I remember checking the time. It was around 11:30 when I heard it. 4 distinct knocks on the window. Tock, 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 tock. I froze, my finger hovering over my phone screen. The knocks weren't loud, but they were clear, like someone tapping their knuckles deliberately against glass. For a split second, my uncle's story flashed through my mind, but I immediately brushed it off. "Nice try," I called out softly, assuming it was one of my cousins who'd returned home and was trying to scare me. "I'm not falling for it." I went back to my fan fiction, but I couldn't focus on the words anymore. Something felt off. The room had gotten noticeably colder, and I pulled the blanket up higher. My uncle was still snoring away beside me, completely oblivious. That's when I felt it, a weight pressing down on my legs like someone sitting on the end of the bed. It wasn't subtle either. It was heavy enough that I couldn't move my legs at all. My heart started racing, and I sat up immediately, expecting to see one of my cousins sitting there playing a prank. There was nothing there, just the outline of my legs under the blanket, but they were clearly being pressed down by something. I reached forward to touch whatever it was, but my hand just met the blanket and my own leg underneath, yet I still couldn't move them. They were pinned down as surely as if someone was sitting right there. "Hello," I whispered, my voice cracking. My uncle just kept snoring. I tried to bend my knees, to pull my legs up toward me, but it was like they were trapped under concrete. The weight was localized and definite, right across my shins, like someone straddling my lower legs. Then, all at once, it was gone. The pressure disappeared so suddenly that my legs actually bounced up slightly under the blanket. The temperature in the room seemed to return to normal, almost instantly. I sat there, heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. My first thought was that I'd imagined it. Maybe I'd dozed off for a second and had a weird half-dream, but I knew I hadn't been sleeping. My phone was still in my hand, the screen still lit up with the same paragraph I'd been reading. My next thought was that my legs had fallen asleep, but that didn't make sense either. They hadn't been in an awkward position, and there was no tingling or pins and needles like you get when circulation returns. I briefly considered waking my uncle, but decided against it. What would I even say? "Hey, I think your knock-knock ghost just sat on my legs." He'd either think I was mocking his story or get genuinely freaked out, and neither scenario seemed helpful at that moment. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe his story had gotten to me more than I realized, and I was experiencing some kind of paranoia or suggestion-induced hallucination. But the thing is, his story hadn't actually scared me when he told it. I'd written it off as just another tall tale, like all his others. There was no reason for me to suddenly manifest physical sensations based on a story I didn't even believe. I stayed awake for hours after that, unable to sleep, just staring at the window and listening. My uncle's snoring provided the only soundtrack to my vigil. I kept expecting to hear those 4 knocks again, but they never came. The next morning, I was exhausted. My uncle was cheerful and seemed to have forgotten all about his ghost story from the night before. I didn't bring it up either. What would be the point? "Hey, remember that ghost you told me about? I think it visited last night." "Yeah, no thanks." The rest of my visit passed without incident. I slept in the guest room after my aunt felt better, and I never heard those 4 knocks again, but I kept the curtains closed every night, just in case. Looking back now, I've tried to find logical explanations for what happened. I've had minor paranormal experiences before, things like thinking I saw something out of the corner of my eye, or feeling like someone was watching me, but I've always been able to explain them away. This was different. There was a physical, tangible pressure on my legs that I can't explain. I've researched sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, all that stuff, but none of it quite fits what I experienced. I wasn't paralyzed completely, just my legs. I wasn't falling asleep or waking up. I was fully awake, reading on my phone. I never asked my uncle more about his experiences with the knock-knock ghost. Part of me was afraid he'd laugh it off and make me feel stupid for taking his story seriously. A bigger part was afraid he wouldn't laugh, that he'd get that same serious look on his face that he had that night. Sometimes I wonder if whatever it was followed me home. I've never heard those 4 distinct knocks again, but sometimes, usually when I'm alone at night, I get that same feeling of being watched, and occasionally, just as I'm drifting off to sleep, I feel the slightest pressure at the foot of my bed, gone so quickly I can almost convince myself I imagined it. I don't know what visited me that night in Finland. I don't know if it was the same entity that haunted my uncle years ago. But I do know that something was in that room with us, something that could make its presence known through sound and touch. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed scrolling through my phone late at night, I find myself listening, just listening, for 4 knocks on my window. Story 9. I can't stop thinking about what happened to me last weekend at that shitty motel outside Amarillo. I'm not normally the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, but what I experienced, I just need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone else has gone through something similar. I was on a solo road trip from Dallas to Colorado. Nothing fancy, just needed to clear my head after a messy breakup. I'd been driving for about 8 hours straight and was completely wiped out. It was getting dark, and I hadn't planned where to stay that night. Figured I'd just find something along the way. Around 9 in the evening, I spotted this old motel just off I-40, about 20 minutes outside Amarillo, the Desert Palm Motel. The vacancy sign was flickering, and the place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s, but I was too exhausted to care. The parking lot was nearly empty, just 2 other cars, not surprising for a Tuesday night in the middle of nowhere. The guy at the front desk was this older man, probably in his 70s, with these thick glasses that magnified his eyes. He barely looked up from his crossword puzzle when I walked in. The lobby smelled like cigarettes and lemon-scented cleaner. He charged me $65 for the night, which seemed steep for what the place looked like, but I was too tired to argue. "Room 17, he mumbled, sliding a real metal key across the counter. Not even a key card. An actual key attached to this bulky plastic keychain with the room number on it. Continental breakfast starts at 6. I grabbed my overnight bag from the car and made my way down the outdoor corridor to my room. The concrete walkway was cracked with these sad-looking potted plants every few doors that looked like they hadn't been watered in weeks. Room 17 was at the very end of the building. When I unlocked the door, I was hit with that distinct motel smell, musty carpet mixed with whatever industrial cleaner they use. The room was small, with faded floral wallpaper and a queen bed covered in a scratchy-looking brown bedspread. There was an old TV, the kind with actual buttons on it, sitting on a wooden dresser and a small round table with one chair by the window. The bathroom was even worse. Tiny, with yellowed linoleum and this ancient wallpaper that was bubbling in places from years of steam and moisture. The shower had one of those plastic curtains that sticks to you when you're showering, and the sink had a slow drip that I couldn't completely turn off. But honestly, I was too tired to care about any of that. I just wanted to crash. I took a quick lukewarm shower, changed into my sleep clothes, and flopped onto the bed. It was uncomfortable as hell. I could feel the springs through the mattress, but I was out within minutes. That's when the dream started. In my dream, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. I remember sliding out of bed and shuffling across the carpet toward the bathroom door. Everything felt heavier in the dream, like I was moving through water. When I flipped the light switch, the fluorescent light above the sink began to flicker, on, off, casting these weird, jerky shadows across the small space. I went to use the toilet, but when I tried to leave afterward, the door was stuck, not locked, just stuck, like something was holding it from the other side. I remember the panic rising in my chest as I pulled harder on the handle. The bathroom felt like it was getting smaller, closing in on me, and the flickering light was giving me a headache. That's when I noticed the wallpaper. In my dream, the bubbling sections were moving, pulsing, almost like they were breathing. I backed up against the door, my heart racing, as one of the bubbles near the sink began to stretch outward. The wallpaper split, and a small hand, a child's hand, pushed through the tear. It was pale, with small fingers and neat nails, like it belonged to a kid maybe 5 or 6 years old. I was frozen in place as the hand reached out, fingers spread wide, searching. I don't know why I did it. Dream logic, I guess. But I reached out too. The small hand grabbed mine, and it was so cold, like the child had been standing in a freezer. The grip was surprisingly strong for a kid's hand, and when I tried to pull away, it held tighter. That's when I woke up, or at least I thought I woke up. My eyes snapped open, and I was staring at the popcorn ceiling of the motel room, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the parking lot lights filtering through the thin curtains. I was lying on my back, my arms at my sides, and I could feel sweat cooling on my forehead. But something was wrong. I could still feel it, the sensation of a small, cold hand gripping my right hand. I froze, every muscle in my body tensed up, and I couldn't breathe. I was too terrified to look. I just kept staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was just sleep paralysis or something. That weird state between sleeping and waking where your brain plays tricks on you. But I could feel it. I could feel each small finger wrapped around my palm, the thumb pressed against the side of my hand. The skin was cool and slightly moist, and there was a subtle pressure, like whoever was holding my hand was trying to comfort me, or maybe was seeking comfort themselves. I don't know how long I lay there, too scared to move. Maybe 10 seconds, maybe 30. It felt like hours. Finally, I gathered every ounce of courage I had and yanked my hand away, rolling to the other side of the bed in one frantic motion. There was nothing there. Of course there wasn't. Just the empty other half of the mattress, the sheets tangled from my movement. I sat up, breathing hard, and switched on the bedside lamp. The sudden light made me squint, and I half expected to see something, someone, scurrying into the shadows, but the room was empty. The bathroom door was closed, just as I'd left it before going to sleep. I checked my phone. 2:15 in the morning. I'd only been asleep for about 3 hours. There was no way I was going back to sleep after that. I turned on the TV with the volume low, flipping through the limited channels until I found some old sitcom reruns. I sat up against the headboard, knees pulled to my chest, watching but not really watching, just needing the light and noise to keep me company. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke up again as grey dawn light was starting to filter through the curtains. The TV was still on, playing some infomercial for a food processor. I reached for the remote to turn it off, and that's when I saw it. At the foot of my bed, crouched on the floor, was what looked like the silhouette of a small boy. He was just squatting there, head tilted slightly as if he was watching me. I could make out the outline of messy hair, maybe blonde, it was hard to tell in the dim light, and skinny arms wrapped around equally skinny legs. I blinked hard, convinced it was just a trick of the light, or my eyes adjusting after sleep. When I opened my eyes and looked again, the shape was still there, but less distinct, like a shadow or a smudge in my vision. I rubbed my eyes with my fists, pressing until I saw stars, and when I looked again, there was nothing there, just the ugly brown carpet and the edge of the dresser. I was out of that room in 15 minutes flat, didn't even shower, just threw my stuff in my bag, pulled on yesterday's clothes and got the hell out of there. I left the key on the dresser. No way was I going back to the front office. But as I was throwing my bag in the trunk, I noticed the old guy who'd checked me in the night before, sweeping the walkway outside the office. Something made me walk over to him. Maybe I needed reassurance that I wasn't losing my mind, or maybe I just wanted some kind of explanation. "Checking out already?" he asked, leaning on his broom. "Breakfast doesn't start for another hour." "Yeah, I need to get back on the road," I said. "Hey, can I ask you something? How long has this motel been here?" He scratched his chin. "Well, the motel's been operating since 1962, but the building's older than that, used to be part of a family home back in the 40s. The owner at the time split it up, added the rooms one by one. My father bought it in 1975, and I took over in 2000 when he passed." "Was there—" I hesitated, feeling stupid. "Has anyone ever mentioned anything strange about room 17? He gave me a long look, and for a second, I thought he was going to say something important, but then he just shrugged. "Nope, can't say they have. Something wrong with the room?" No, I said quickly. "Just had some weird dreams, that's all." He nodded. "These old walls have seen a lot, I suppose. Safe travels. I couldn't get back in my car fast enough. Look, I know how this sounds. I know dreams can bleed into those moments when you're just waking up. I know shadows can play tricks on you in unfamiliar rooms. I've read about sleep paralysis and hypnagogic hallucinations, but that hand holding mine, it wasn't a lingering dream sensation. It wasn't my own hand that had fallen asleep. It was real, cold, small fingers wrapped around mine. I can still feel it if I think about it too much." I drove straight through to Colorado that day, stopping only for gas and coffee. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I closed my eyes for too long, I'd open them to find that small boy watching me, maybe reaching out with his cold little hand again. I've tried to rationalize it 100 different ways, but I keep coming back to one thought. What if that motel room used to be a child's bedroom? What if something happened there that left some kind of impression? I don't know, maybe I am just losing it. But I do know I'm never staying in a roadside motel again, and I'm definitely taking the long way around Amarillo on my drive back to Dallas next week. Story 10. I still have nightmares about it, even after all these years. I've never shared this outside my family, but I need to tell someone who might understand. What happened to me nearly 40 years ago in that forest changed me forever. I was 22 then, living in our ancestral village in Tamil Nadu. Life was simple. I had my 4-year-old son, Arjun, who was my entire world after my husband passed away from fever just a year after our marriage. I lived with my parents, helping with household chores and raising Arjun. That day started so ordinarily. It was the month of Margaji, slightly chilly for our region. My uncle's daughter was getting married in a village about 10 kilometers away, and someone needed to deliver the auspicious items for the pre-wedding rituals: turmeric, vermilion, betel leaves, coconut, and some family jewelry that had been promised for the bride. "Lakshmi, can you take these items to Palakonda village?" my father asked that morning. "Everyone else is busy with preparations here." I didn't mind. Though the walk was long, I enjoyed occasional breaks from village routine. I packed the items carefully in a cloth bag, took some food and water, and also grabbed my trusted iron chimta tongs that I always carried when traveling, useful for adjusting fire when stopping to rest, and my mother had always said iron keeps evil spirits away. I smiled at that thought then. How naive I was. Arjun was excited about the journey. "Amma, I want to come too," he pleaded, his big eyes looking up at me. I couldn't say no. He rarely got to explore beyond our village. We left around 9 in the morning. The first 2 hours were pleasant, walking through familiar paths and neighboring villages. Arjun skipped alongside me, pointing at butterflies and asking endless questions. I remember feeling so content, holding his little hand in mine. Around midday, we reached the forest that separated our cluster of villages from Palikonda. It wasn't a dense jungle, just a stretch of woods with a clear path running through it, alongside a small brook. People crossed it regularly without incident. "We'll be through this part quickly," I told Arjun. "Then we'll stop to eat our lunch." The forest was unusually quiet that day. No birds singing, no rustling in the undergrowth. Even the brook seemed to flow silently. I felt uneasy, but pushed the feeling aside. We'd walked about half a kilometer into the forest when I first saw her. Standing by the brook was a woman dressed in a brilliant red wedding sari with a golden border. She wore heavy gold jewelry, necklaces, bangles, a nose ring, and an elaborate headpiece. Her hands and feet were adorned with intricate henna patterns. She looked like a bride waiting for her ceremony. What struck me as odd was that she was alone. No one in their right mind would leave a bride, dressed in all her finery and jewelry, alone in a forest. And what was a bride doing in the forest anyway? She turned toward us, and I felt Arjun's hand tighten around mine. "Namaste," I said cautiously, planning to walk past quickly. The woman smiled, but something about it made my skin crawl. "What a beautiful boy," she said, her voice unnaturally melodious. "What is your name, little one?" Before I could stop him, Arjun replied, "My name is Arjun." The woman's smile widened. Arjun. Such a strong name for such a strong boy. I tried to keep walking, pulling Arjun along. "We must reach Palikonda before sunset," I explained hurriedly. She stepped directly into our path. "I am barren," she said abruptly. "Give me this boy. I'll raise him as my own." My blood ran cold. I clutched Arjun tighter. "No, he is my son," I said firmly, trying to step around her. She moved with unnatural speed, blocking us again. "I can give you gold," she said, removing a heavy bangle from her wrist. "More than you'll see in your lifetime. Just give me the boy." I felt panic rising in my throat. "No," I said more forcefully. "Please let us pass." I pulled Arjun and tried to walk quickly in another direction. What happened next still haunts me. The woman didn't run or walk. She seemed to leap through the air, covering at least 5 meters in a single bound. She landed directly in front of us again, her feet not making a sound as they touched the earth. That's when I knew something was terribly wrong. "I want him," she insisted, her voice changing, becoming less melodious and more grating. "Give him to me now." I looked more closely at her face and noticed her skin beginning to change. The warm brown complexion was fading to an ashy gray. Her eyes, initially a normal brown, were darkening until they became completely black. Not just the iris, but the entire eye. The most terrifying change was her smile. It stretched unnaturally wide across her face, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous and sharp to belong to a human mouth. A putrid smell suddenly filled the air around us, like rotting flesh and stagnant water. I gagged and covered my mouth with my free hand. "Amma," Arjun said, and what I heard next chilled me to my core. "Amma, I want to go with her. Let me go with her." I looked down at my son in horror. His eyes were fixed on the woman, his expression eager and entranced. He began pulling against my hand, trying to break free from my grip. "Arjun, no!" I cried, holding him tighter. He began to struggle violently, scratching at my arms and hands. "Let me go!" he screamed, his voice not sounding like my gentle son at all. "She wants me. I want to go." The creature, for I now knew it was not a woman, extended her arms toward my son. Her fingers had elongated, the nails curved into claws. The beautiful red sari now looked stained and tattered, as though it had been buried and dug up again. "He wants to come with me," the creature said, its voice now a horrible rasp. "See how he struggles against you. Give him to me." Arjun was fighting so hard that I had to use both hands to hold him. He was scratching and biting me, drawing blood from my arms. I had never seen such strength in him. In my desperation, I remembered the iron tongs in my bag. Still clutching Arjun with one hand, I reached into my bag with the other and grabbed the chimta. The creature lunged forward. I swung the iron tongs at it without thinking. When the metal touched the creature's outstretched arm, there was a sizzling sound like water hitting hot oil. The creature let out an inhuman shriek that seemed to shake the trees around us. Where the iron had touched its skin, the flesh had burned black. It recoiled, its face contorting with rage and pain. "Give me the boy," it demanded, circling us. I brandished the tongs in front of me like a weapon. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice shaking with fear. Arjun was still struggling wildly, reaching toward the creature and crying. I had to drag him backward while keeping the tongs pointed at the entity. Each time it tried to approach, I swung the iron at it. Each contact brought that terrible sizzling and shrieking. The smell of its burning flesh mixed with the rotting stench, making me gag repeatedly. I don't know how long this terrible dance continued, me backing away, dragging my possessed child with one hand while fighting off the creature with the other. My arms were bleeding from Arjun's scratches, my legs trembling from fear and exhaustion. The creature's appearance continued to deteriorate the longer we fought. The beautiful bride was gone completely now. What remained was a gaunt, grey-skinned entity with hollowed cheeks and those terrible black eyes. The gold jewelry had tarnished to black, and the red sari hung in tatters from its emaciated frame. I noticed we were approaching the edge of the forest. I could see more sunlight breaking through the trees ahead. With renewed determination, I continued backing toward it, swinging the tongs whenever the creature came too close. As we neared the forest's edge, the creature became frantic, its movements more aggressive. "He is mine!" it screeched, the sound piercing my ears like needles. With one final effort, I lifted Arjun, still kicking and scratching, and ran the last few meters to the edge of the forest. As we broke into the sunlight of the open fields beyond, Arjun suddenly went limp in my arms. I turned back, tongs raised, expecting the creature to follow. But it stood at the very edge of the forest, unable or unwilling to step into the open. It raised its head and let out a wail of such profound rage and loss that I felt it in my bones. Then, before my eyes, it seemed to fold in on itself, becoming smaller and smaller until it vanished completely. Arjun began to stir in my arms. His eyes fluttered open, clear and normal. "Amma," he said, confused. "Why are you crying? Why does my head hurt?" He had no memory of what had happened, no recollection of trying to go with the creature, of fighting against me, of scratching my arms raw. I was too terrified to continue to Palikonda. I carried Arjun all the way back to our village despite my exhaustion. When I arrived, covered in scratches and wild-eyed with terror, my family thought I'd been attacked by bandits. Only my grandmother understood when I finally managed to explain through my tears and terror. "Mohini," she whispered, "a spirit that takes the form of a beautiful woman to lure men and children. You're lucky you had the iron, or we would never have seen either of you again." For weeks afterward, Arjun had terrible nightmares. He would wake up screaming that the bride was calling him from the forest. Eventually, the nightmares faded and he forgot the incident entirely as he grew older. I never went into that forest again. I've heard stories over the years of other travelers encountering a bride there, always asking for children, always offering gold. Some who laughed off the stories ventured into those woods and never returned. To this day, I keep iron tongs by my door and windows. I know what lurks in the spaces between our world and whatever lies beyond. I know how thin the barrier can be, and how easily it can be crossed by things that hunger for what we hold dear. The scratches on my arms healed long ago, but I still bear the scars, a reminder that some brides are not waiting for a groom, but for unwary travelers and the children they can steal away. Story 11. I've debated for months about whether to share this. It sounds crazy no matter how I explain it, and I'm not even sure I want answers anymore, but I need to tell someone who won't immediately tell me I'm losing it or that I'm just feeling guilty. This all started back on September 1st, 2020, which will forever be burned into my memory as the day I lost one of my closest friends. Sarah was found in her apartment after overdosing. The official ruling was accidental, not suicide, but that didn't make it any easier to process. She was only 28, engaged to be married to Mike in just 4 months, and had a 5-year-old daughter. Everyone was shocked because Sarah had been clean for over 3 years. What makes this even harder to talk about is that Sarah and I had been having these really intense conversations in the weeks before she died. We'd stay up late, drinking wine on her back porch while her daughter slept, talking about what happens after we die. She wasn't religious, but she was fascinated by the idea that consciousness might continue somehow. She'd say things like, "I think we stick around for a while, making sure our people are okay before we move on to whatever's next." I remember laughing it off, telling her she was being morbid. God, I wish I'd paid more attention to those conversations now. After the funeral, I found myself spending more time with Mike. It started innocently enough. I was just helping him sort through Sarah's things, watching her daughter sometimes when he needed a break. I'd known Mike for years through Sarah, and we'd always gotten along well. He was completely broken after losing her, and honestly, I was pretty messed up too. I didn't expect to develop feelings for him. I really didn't. It just happened gradually over the first few months after Sarah died. By December, I was disgusted with myself. What kind of person falls for their dead friend's fiancé? I felt like the worst person alive, like I was betraying her memory with every thought I had about him. Mike and I never discussed these feelings at first. We were both just trying to get through each day. But there was this tension building between us that neither of us acknowledged. Then came the night in January that changed everything. It was freezing outside, and Mike had dropped by my place to return some of Sarah's journals I'd lent him. We ended up talking for hours, and it got too late for him to drive home in the snowstorm that had developed. I told him he could crash on my couch. Around midnight, we were both in my living room. I was curled up in the armchair, scrolling through Netflix, while Mike was on the couch, flipping through one of Sarah's old photo albums. Neither of us was talking. The only sound was the wind howling outside and the occasional creak of my old apartment building. That's when it happened. My Google Mini, which was sitting on the coffee table, suddenly lit up. Nobody had said, "Hey Google," or touched it. The blue lights just started spinning, and then music began playing. It wasn't playing from the beginning of a song, but rather started mid-verse. The song was "Counting Down the Days" by Above and Beyond. I'd never heard this song before. I don't even listen to that type of music. The lyrics that played were about being cold in the dark with no light and waiting for someone to come back. Mike and I just froze, staring at the little device. I finally said, "What the hell?" And the music just kept playing until the song ended. Then the Google Mini went dark like nothing had happened. "Did you do that?" Mike asked me. I shook my head. Neither of us had touched our phones or given any voice command. Something compelled us to look up the music video for the song. When we watched it, my skin broke out in goosebumps. The video showed scenes of a beach wedding with decorations that looked eerily similar to what Sarah had been planning for her and Mike's ceremony. Even weirder, the woman in the video had the same hair color and similar features to Sarah. But the most chilling part was the storyline of the video. It showed a woman who seemed to be watching over someone she loved, encouraging him to find happiness with someone else after she was gone. The final scene showed the man moving on with a new partner, while the woman's spirit seemed at peace with it. Mike and I didn't talk about it that night. It was too weird, too emotional. He slept on the couch, and I barely slept at all, lying in bed wondering if I was losing my mind or if Sarah was somehow trying to communicate with us. The next morning, we both acted like nothing happened. I made coffee, we talked about normal stuff, and he left. But I couldn't stop thinking about that song and what it might mean. Over the next few weeks, Mike and I started spending more time together. We were still fighting our feelings, still overwhelmed with guilt. But something had shifted after that night. It was like we both felt a little less terrible about the connection growing between us. Then came Valentine's Day. I know how that sounds, so cliché, but it wasn't planned. Mike came over because neither of us wanted to be alone on a day that just reminded us of what we'd lost. Sarah had always gone all out for Valentine's Day, decorating her daughter's room with paper hearts and making heart-shaped pancakes. We ordered takeout and watched a stupid action movie to avoid anything romantic. But halfway through the movie, Mike reached over and took my hand. We just sat there for a long time, holding hands, not looking at each other. When the movie ended, he turned to me, and we finally talked about what we'd both been feeling. I feel like I'm betraying her, I admitted, tears streaming down my face. Me too, Mike whispered. But I also feel like she'd understand. She always said life was for the living. That night we crossed the line we'd been tiptoeing around for months. After we'd been intimate, we were lying in my bed, the room dark except for the streetlight filtering through the blinds. I was overwhelmed with emotions, happiness mixed with crushing guilt. I was staring at the ceiling when my Google Mini, which was on my nightstand, suddenly lit up again. No one had spoken. The room had been completely silent for several minutes, but the device activated and a woman's voice, the standard Google voice, said clearly, "I'm happy you're happy." Mike sat bolt upright. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice shaking. I nodded, unable to speak. We both stared at the device as the lights faded. "That's impossible," I finally managed to say. "It only responds to commands." The next morning I checked the activity logs on my Google Home app. According to the log, the device had activated because it heard "Hey Google" followed by a question about happiness. But nobody had said those words. We'd been lying in complete silence. Over the next few days, I tried to recreate what had happened. I'd say various phrases about being happy, ask the Google Mini direct questions about happiness, but nothing triggered that same response. Until 3 days later, when Mike was over again, we were in the kitchen making dinner when the Google Mini in the living room activated and said the exact same phrase, "I'm happy you're happy." We both stopped what we were doing and just stared at each other. "Sarah?" Mike called out hesitantly. The Google Mini didn't respond. That night it happened again after we'd gone to bed, and then again the next morning while we were having coffee. Always the same phrase, always unprompted. I even recorded it happening once to prove to myself I wasn't imagining things. I ended up completely unplugging the Google Mini for a week because it was freaking me out so badly. When I plugged it back in, nothing unusual happened for a few days. I started to think maybe it had just been some weird glitch. Then one night in March, Mike and I were looking through old photos of Sarah on my phone. We found one from a camping trip the three of us had taken 2 summers before, where Sarah was standing by a lake at sunset, laughing. I remembered taking that picture, how beautiful she'd looked with the light hitting her face just right. "She looked so happy there," Mike said softly. The Google Mini lit up and said, "I'm happy you're happy." I screamed. I actually screamed and threw a pillow at the device, knocking it off the side table. Mike picked it up and examined it like it might contain some explanation. "This isn't possible," I kept saying. "This isn't possible." Mike set the device down carefully and took my hands. "What if it is?" he asked. "What if she's trying to tell us something?" I wanted to dismiss it as a technical glitch, but the timing was too perfect, too specific to our moments of guilt and uncertainty. It only happened when we were together, only when we were having emotional moments about Sarah or about our relationship. The final incident happened in April, on what would have been Sarah's 29th birthday. Mike and I had taken her daughter to the lake, the same lake from that photo, to release some flowers into the water in Sarah's memory. When we got back to my place, Sarah's daughter fell asleep on the couch almost immediately, exhausted from the emotional day. Mike and I were sitting at my kitchen table, talking quietly about Sarah, sharing memories. I was saying how much I missed her, but that I was grateful to have both Mike and her daughter in my life. The Google Mini on my counter activated, and this time it didn't just say the usual phrase. It said, "I'm happy you're happy. Remember, I love you both." Mike's face went white. I felt like all the air had been sucked from the room. Neither of us moved for what felt like forever. Later that night, after Mike and Sarah's daughter had gone home, I took the Google Mini and put it in a box in my closet. I haven't plugged it in since. I've researched technical explanations, talked to IT people, even had someone check if my accounts had been hacked. Nothing explains what happened. The device's logs show it responding to commands that were never given. The timing of the activations defies random chance. Mike and I are still together. We're taking it slow, still working through our complicated feelings. Sometimes when I'm alone, I take out that Google Mini and just look at it, wondering if I should plug it in again, if Sarah might have something else to tell us, but I'm scared of what might happen if I do. What if it was really her somehow using technology to reach across whatever divide separates us from those we've lost? And what if next time she has something different to say? I still don't have any answers. All I know is what happened, what I heard with my own ears, what was documented in the activity logs. And I know that sometimes late at night I still whisper Sarah into the darkness of my room, half hoping, half dreading that something might answer back. Story 12. I still can't explain what happened to us that day in Murderer's Gulch. It's been 3 months, and I wake up in cold sweats thinking about it. I'm not the type to believe in the paranormal or any of that crap, but what happened out there defies any logical explanation I can come up with. My girlfriend Amber and I are pretty experienced outdoor people. We've been hiking and exploring the backwoods of British Columbia for years. This past summer, we decided to check out this remote spot in the Caribou Goldfields called Murderer's Gulch. Yeah, I know the name should have been our first red flag, but we're history buffs, and the story behind it was fascinating. Back in the 1860s, 3 gold miners were murdered and robbed there. Their bodies were found weeks later, but the killer was never caught. What really drew us there was an abandoned mine we'd heard about from some locals. The problem was getting to it. The old logging road that led in that direction had been deactivated years ago and was completely overgrown. We're stubborn though, and we thought it would be a cool project to clear it enough to get my truck through. We spent the first 2 days just cutting back brush, filling in washouts, and moving fallen trees. By the afternoon of day 2, we'd made decent progress, but still had at least a mile of road to fix. We decided to park the truck and walk the rest of the way to see what we were dealing with and get a look at the mine site. I brought my 45-70 lever-action guide gun. It's basically a modern version of the old buffalo rifles. I know it sounds excessive, but this was serious grizzly country, and we'd seen fresh scat and tracks while clearing the road. Better safe than sorry. The hike to the mine site took about 45 minutes. It was a beautiful day. Sunny, about 70 degrees, light breeze, perfect hiking weather. We found the old mine entrance partially collapsed and covered with warning signs. We didn't go in, we're not idiots, but we explored the surrounding area where there were still some collapsed buildings and rusted equipment. We spent about an hour there taking pictures and checking everything out. Nothing seemed off at all. It was around 3 in the afternoon when we started heading back, and that's when things got weird. We'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes when I got this overwhelming feeling of being watched. It wasn't just paranoia, it was a physical sensation, like a pressure bearing down on me. I glanced at Amber, and I could tell from her face she felt it too. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. That's when I realized something else was wrong. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing, nothing. Just absolute dead silence. If you've spent any time in the woods, you know that's not normal. The forest is never quiet like that. We picked up our pace a bit, and I unholstered my rifle just in case. We'd gone maybe another 100 yards when the silence was broken by a squirrel making these frantic alarm calls from a tree to our right. I've heard squirrels make alarm calls before, but this was different. More desperate, more panicked. Then came the knocks. 3 loud, distinct knocks that seemed to echo through the silent forest. It sounded exactly like someone taking a large rock and hitting a tree with it. Knock, knock, knock. They were evenly spaced, maybe 3 seconds apart, and they were close. I'd guess no more than 50 yards into the trees to our left. What the hell was that? Amber whispered, gripping my arm. I don't know. Probably a woodpecker, I said, but I didn't believe it. No woodpecker sounds like that. We kept moving, faster now. I had this sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. The path narrowed ahead, with a steep cliff dropping off to our right and dense forest to our left. As we approached this bottleneck, I heard something moving through the underbrush, paralleling our path. It wasn't making any attempt to be quiet. Branches were snapping, leaves rustling. Whatever it was big and it was following us. Then, from about 200 meters ahead of us, 5 more knocks sounded. These were even louder than the first set. Knock, 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 knock. Same rhythm, same sound. It was like whatever was making the noise had circled ahead of us. Martin, what the fuck is happening? Amber was crying now, and honestly, I was close to it myself. I don't know, but we need to get back to the truck. Just keep moving. The bottleneck was about 50 meters long, and with each step, I felt more trapped. The thing in the woods was still pacing us, and now I could smell something, a rank, musty odor that made my nose burn. I had the rifle ready, safety off, but I didn't know what I was going to be shooting at. We were about halfway through the narrowest part when I spotted movement on the path ahead. At first glance, it looked like a coyote standing in the middle of the trail. But as we got closer, something seemed off about it. It was the right size and shape, but its fur was patchy, and it stood completely still, staring at us with what looked like unnaturally pale eyes. I raised my rifle, but before I could decide whether to shoot, I noticed movement on both sides of the trail. There were more of them, 6 in total. They had us surrounded. Martin. Amber's voice was barely audible. Stay behind me, I whispered back. Here's the thing. They weren't acting like normal coyotes. They weren't growling or showing their teeth. They were just watching. And they were positioned in a way that blocked certain directions but left others open. It was almost like they were herding us. I took a step to the right toward what looked like a gap in their formation, and immediately the 2 coyotes on that side lowered their heads and started growling. When I stepped back to the center of the trail, they stopped. I think they want us to go that way. Amber pointed to a small game trail that branched off from the main path. It wasn't the way back to our truck, but it was the only direction the coyotes weren't blocking. That doesn't make any sense, I said, but nothing about this situation made sense. I took a tentative step toward the game trail, and the coyotes remained still. Another step, and they still didn't react. It was clear they were guiding us this way. I don't like this, I said, but I think we need to follow this trail for now. Stay close. The game trail was narrow and winding, and every instinct I had was screaming that this was wrong. We were moving away from our truck, deeper into unfamiliar territory, but whenever we tried to turn back or head in a different direction, the coyotes would appear again, blocking our path and becoming increasingly aggressive. We followed the trail for maybe 20 minutes, with the coyotes flanking us just out of sight in the brush. I could catch glimpses of them through the trees, keeping pace with us. The whole time, the forest remained eerily silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Then, suddenly, we emerged into a small clearing, and the trail ahead split in 2. The coyotes stopped at the edge of the clearing, watching us. It was clear they weren't going any further. Which way? Amber asked. Before I could answer, those knocks sounded again, this time from the direction of the left-hand path. 3 loud, deliberate knocks. Without hesitation, we took the right path. The coyotes didn't follow, and within minutes, I started hearing normal forest sounds again. Birds singing, insects buzzing. The oppressive feeling of being watched gradually lifted. The trail eventually connected back to the main logging road about a quarter-mile from where we'd parked our truck. We practically ran the rest of the way, not stopping until we were safely inside with the doors locked. As we sat there trying to process what had happened, something occurred to me that made my blood run cold. Those coyotes hadn't been threatening us, they'd been protecting us. They'd deliberately guided us away from whatever was making those knocking sounds in the woods. We drove back to town in silence, both of us too shaken to talk about what we'd experienced. It wasn't until later that night, when we were safely back in our hotel room, that Amber brought up something I hadn't even considered. "Martin," she said, "do you remember exactly where we were when everything went silent?" I thought about it, trying to retrace our steps in my mind. "Yeah, we were about 10 minutes from the mine site. Why?" "That's where they found those 3 miners back in the 1860s, the ones who were murdered. I don't know what happened to us in Murderer's Gulch that day. I don't know what was making those knocking sounds or why the coyotes behaved the way they did. All I know is that something was out there, something that didn't want us in that part of the woods. I've done some research since then, and apparently there's a phenomenon called the Oz effect, where everything goes completely silent right before a paranormal encounter. People report feeling like they've stepped into another dimension, cut off from the normal world. That's exactly what it felt like. We haven't gone back, and we never will. Some places should just be left alone. Sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I still hear those knocks echoing through the silent forest. Knock, knock, knock. And I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't listened to those coyotes. I wonder what was waiting for us down that left-hand path." Story 13. I've been wanting to share this for a while now, but every time I start typing it out, I delete everything and close my laptop. It's been 3 years, and I still can't explain what happened that night. I'm not asking anyone to believe me, I just need to get this out. I was living in this run-down rental house in rural Kentucky at the time. This was back in 2018, probably the lowest point in my life. I'd lost my job at the factory after they downsized, and my girlfriend had moved out a few months before that, said she couldn't handle my moods anymore. Can't really blame her. The house itself was exactly what you'd expect for $300 a month. Peeling paint, sagging porch, those old wooden floors that creak with every step. The screen door had this awful squeak that would announce anyone coming or going. Not that anyone ever visited. I didn't have friends in the area, and my family had pretty much written me off by then. Most days I'd wake up around noon, crack open my first beer by 1, and then just exist until I passed out. Sometimes I'd watch whatever came on the ancient TV. Sometimes I'd just sit on that rickety porch and stare out at the overgrown field across the dirt road. The nearest neighbor was about a half-mile down the way, and we never spoke beyond a nod if we happened to check the mail at the same time. This particular day, I remember it was a Wednesday because my unemployment check had come in the mail, had been especially rough. I'd called my sister thinking maybe I could crash with her for a bit while I got back on my feet. She didn't even let me finish before telling me she couldn't enable my self-destruction anymore. Those were her exact words, self-destruction, like I wanted to be unemployed and alone in the middle of nowhere. After that call, I drove into town and cashed the check, bought a handle of cheap whiskey and a case of beer. I know, not exactly the responsible choice, but I wasn't feeling particularly responsible. I just wanted to not feel anything for a while. I started drinking around 4 that afternoon. By 9, I was pretty far gone, slumped in this ratty armchair by the window in my bedroom. The TV was on, but I couldn't tell you what was playing. I remember staring at the condensation on my beer can, watching the little droplets run down the side. I must have nodded off at some point. What woke me was this weird feeling, like when you think someone's watching you, that prickling sensation on the back of your neck. I sat up straighter, trying to shake off the alcohol fog. My bedroom window faced the front porch. The curtains were these thin, yellowed things that the previous tenant had left behind. I never bothered replacing them. Through them, I could see it was fully dark outside now. The only light came from this old security light on a pole near the driveway that cast everything in this sickly yellow glow, And there, sitting on the porch railing, was a boy. At first, I thought I was still drunk and seeing things. I rubbed my eyes hard, but when I looked again, he was still there, just sitting, perfectly balanced on that weathered wooden rail. He looked about 9 or 10 years old. What struck me immediately was how he was dressed. We're talking rural Kentucky in the middle of summer, where most kids run around in dirty t-shirts and cut-off shorts. But this kid was wearing what looked like a white dress shirt, buttoned all the way up, with some kind of dark vest over it. His pants looked pressed, for God's sake, and his shoes, they were shiny like patent leather, dangling off the edge of the railing. It made no sense. No kid dresses like that around here, especially not to play outside at, I glanced at the clock, 11:30 at night. I sat there for a minute, trying to figure out what to do. Maybe he was lost. Maybe I should ask if he needed help, but something kept me frozen in that chair. Something wasn't right. The boy wasn't moving, not fidgeting, not swinging his legs, not looking around like a normal kid would. He was just sitting there, his back perfectly straight, staring directly at my window. That's when I realized he could see me through the thin curtains. I stood up, thinking I should go outside and see what was going on. But as soon as I got to my feet, the boy turned his head, slowly, mechanically, until he was looking right at me. I'll never forget his eyes. They weren't just dark, they were completely black. No whites at all, like empty holes in his face, like looking into nothing. The moment our eyes met, something happened to me. It was like my entire body just locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even blink. A primal fear washed over me, the kind that bypasses your rational brain and goes straight to your lizard hindbrain. I felt cold sweat break out all over my body. The boy's mouth curved into this smile. Not a normal kid smile. There was nothing innocent or joyful about it. It was knowing, smug, like he was enjoying my fear. He leaned forward, gripping the railing with small hands, and tilted his head slightly. Then he spoke. "Nobody's ever gonna forgive you, not really." His voice sounded wrong, clear and articulate, not like a child at all. And the words, those specific words, they cut right through me, because forgiving myself for all the ways I'd screwed up my life was something I'd been struggling with for years. The drinking, the job losses, pushing away everyone who cared about me. How could this kid know exactly what would hurt the most to hear? Then he laughed. It started as a child's laugh, high-pitched and light. But as it continued, it dropped lower and lower until it didn't sound human at all. It was this deep rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the wooden boards of the porch, through the floor under my feet and up into my chest. I swear I could feel it in my fillings. I must have blacked out then, because the next thing I remember is waking up on the floor beside my chair. Sunlight was streaming through the window. My head was pounding from the whiskey, and for a moment I convinced myself it had all been some alcohol-induced nightmare. I dragged myself to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and took some aspirin. As the fog cleared from my brain, I kept telling myself it wasn't real. Just a drunk hallucination, sleep paralysis maybe. I'd read about that somewhere. But then I went to the kitchen to make coffee, and through the window over the sink I could see the front porch. Something compelled me to go out there. My legs felt wooden as I pushed open that squeaky screen door and stepped onto the weathered boards. The morning was already hot and humid, cicadas starting to buzz in the trees. Everything looked normal, just an old sagging porch on a rundown rental in the middle of nowhere. I walked over to the railing where I'd seen the boy sitting. There was nothing there. No footprints in the dust, no disturbance of any kind. I was about to turn back inside when something caught my eye. There, on the top rail, were 2 small marks, scuff marks, like the kind polished shoes might make if someone were sitting there, swinging their legs back and forth against the wood. They were exactly where his feet would have been. I ran my fingers over them. They were fresh, the exposed wood lighter than the weathered gray around it. I hadn't noticed them before yesterday. I'm sure of it. I spent the rest of the day sober for the first time in months, jumping at every sound, checking the windows constantly. Night fell, and I couldn't bring myself to turn off any lights. I sat in the living room with every lamp on, the TV blaring some mindless sitcom I wasn't watching. Around the same time as the night before, I heard a noise from the porch, that distinctive creak of someone's weight on old wood. I froze, remote control clutched in my hand like some pathetic weapon. The screen door handle jiggled, just slightly, like someone testing to see if it was locked. It wasn't. I never locked it. There was nothing worth stealing in that house, and besides, who would bother coming all the way out here? The jiggling stopped. Then, from right outside the door, I heard that laugh again, starting high, dropping impossibly low. I spent the night in my truck, parked at the 24-hour Walmart 20 miles away. The next day, I called my landlord and told him I was leaving. I didn't even care about the security deposit. I packed what little I owned into my truck and drove straight to my sister's house 5 hours away. I think she was so shocked by my appearance, sober, terrified, desperate, that she let me in without the lecture I deserved. I've been staying with her ever since. Got a job at the hardware store in town. Haven't touched alcohol in 3 years. I go to meetings twice a week, but I still can't sleep without checking all the windows and doors. I still wake up sometimes around 11:30, that cold sweat breaking out all over my body. And sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep, I think I hear that laugh in the distance. I never went back to that house, never tried to find out if anyone else had seen that boy. I don't want to know. The thing is, I keep wondering about what he said. Nobody's ever gonna forgive you, not really. Was it a threat, a prediction, or was it pushing me to finally forgive myself? I'm trying to, every day, I'm trying. But I still check the porch before I go to bed, every single night. Story 14. I don't talk about this much. It's been 5 years, but sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, smelling phantom smoke. The doctors say that's normal after what happened. The fire department says what happened wasn't normal at all. I guess I'm writing this all down now because I need to make sense of it somehow, even though I know I probably never will. It was a Saturday afternoon in October. Nothing special about the day, just cool enough that I had the windows closed. My husband Mike and our 17-year-old son Jason had gone out to get cat food. We'd been putting it off, but our oldest cat Milo was getting picky and refusing to eat the brand we had. It was supposed to be a quick trip, 20 minutes tops. The pet store was only a few miles away. I have COPD and use oxygen, and I was sitting on our bed trying to put some makeup on for a change. I usually don't bother, but we were thinking about maybe going out for dinner later. I had to take my oxygen off to do my face. I know, it sounds stupid now. The nasal cannula gets in the way, and I just wanted to look nice for once. I set the oxygen tube down next to me, but somehow it slipped off the edge of the bed, falling into that narrow gap between the bed and the nightstand. I leaned over to grab it, and that's when I saw it, our power strip. The one that had all our bedroom electronics plugged into it, my CPAP machine, phone chargers, the bedside lamp, and Mike's radio. The casing had melted. I hadn't noticed before, but it must have been happening gradually. There were exposed wires, and I could see little sparks where the plastic had worn through. We'd had that power strip for years, probably should have replaced it ages ago. As I was reaching down, the oxygen tube, still flowing at 2 liters per minute, must have pointed right at those exposed wires. I didn't even see it happen. 1 second I was reaching, the next there was this whoosh sound, and suddenly flames were racing up the side of the bed. The oxygen had ignited the sparks, and the fire spread to the bedspread in seconds. I screamed and jumped back, knocking my makeup all over the floor. The flames were already spreading to the carpet, this awful shag carpet we'd been meaning to replace for years. My brain just froze for a second. Mike and Jason were gone. I was alone with our pets, 6 dogs and 3 cats, including Luna, who'd just had kittens 3 weeks earlier. They were in a basket in the corner of the bedroom. The dogs started barking like crazy, circling around me, sensing something was terribly wrong. I ran to the bathroom, grabbed a cup of water and threw it on the flames, but it was useless, like trying to put out a bonfire with a teaspoon. The fire was growing, feeding on the old mattress that went up like it was soaked in gasoline. Black smoke started filling the room. I was coughing, couldn't catch my breath. I called 911, but I was so panicked I could barely speak. I remember the dispatcher telling me to get out of the house, but all I could think about were the animals. Luna's kittens were so tiny, their eyes barely open. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed whatever liquids I could find, a half-empty bottle of soda, a carton of milk from the fridge, a bottle of cooking oil before I realized that would make it worse. I was just dumping anything I could find on the flames while trying to scoop up kittens and herd dogs toward the front door. The smoke was getting thicker, making it harder to see, harder to breathe. My lungs were burning. Without my oxygen, I was already struggling, and the smoke made it 100 times worse. I could hear the fire crackling, eating through the mattress. I don't know what possessed me, but I started pulling at the burning mattress with my bare hands, trying to drag the flaming parts away from the rest. The pain was immediate and intense. I can still feel it sometimes when I close my eyes. My hands were burning, skin peeling away, but I kept pulling at the stuffing, throwing the burning chunks onto the floor and stomping on them. The dogs were going crazy, running in circles, barking. Some of them tried to help, tugging at my clothes to pull me away from the fire. Milo, our old cat, was hiding under the bed right in the path of the flames. I got down on my hands and knees, reaching under to grab him, feeling the heat searing my already burned hands. I managed to get all 3 cats and 5 of the dogs into the living room, but Penny, our little Chihuahua mix, kept running back to the bedroom, barking at the fire like she thought she could scare it away. Every time I'd grab her, she'd wriggle free and run back. The smoke was getting so thick I could barely see her. The fire department seemed to be taking forever. The flames had spread to the curtains now, and the ceiling was turning black. The smoke detector was shrieking, adding to the chaos. My chest felt like it was being crushed in a vice. I couldn't stop coughing, couldn't get a deep breath. I remember looking at my phone. Only 8 minutes had passed since I called 911. It felt like hours. The fire was spreading too fast. I knew I had to get the animals out, but I couldn't carry them all, and they were too scared to follow commands. My thinking was getting fuzzy from the smoke. I started feeling lightheaded, disoriented. I stumbled, fell to my knees. Penny finally came to me, whimpering. I picked her up, clutching her against my chest. My hands were in agony, blistered and raw, but I held on to her. I remember having this moment of perfect clarity amid all the chaos. I wasn't going to make it. The fire was between me and the front door. I couldn't carry all the animals out. I couldn't even save myself. My lungs weren't working right. The smoke was too thick. I was going to die here, and so were these innocent creatures who depended on me. I crawled to the corner of the living room, as far from the bedroom as I could get. I held Penny close, feeling her tiny heart racing against mine. The other dogs huddled around me. Luna had somehow carried one of her kittens over to me. I closed my eyes. I'm not a particularly religious person. Mike and I used to go to church when Jason was little, but we drifted away over the years. But in that moment, I prayed. Not even to God specifically, just to anyone or anything that might be listening. Please, I whispered, my voice raspy from the smoke. Please, someone, anyone, if you can hear me. Please don't let us die. They don't deserve this. Help us. I must have started to lose consciousness then. Everything gets hazy in my memory. I remember hearing a distant pounding sound, voices shouting, then Mike's face swimming above me, his eyes wide with terror. Jason was there too, pulling at my arms, trying to lift me. The animals, I kept saying, save the animals. My voice didn't even sound like mine. Mike and Jason half carried, half dragged me outside. The fresh air hit my lungs like knives. I was coughing so hard I thought I would tear something inside. Through watering eyes, I could see the neighbors gathered on the lawn, someone holding a garden hose that wouldn't reach far enough to help. The pets, I gasped, clutching at Mike's shirt. They're still inside. Mike looked at Jason. Stay with her, he said, and before I could stop him, he ran back into the house. Jason was shouting for him not to go, but Mike disappeared through the front door. The next few minutes were the longest of my life. I kept trying to get up to go after him, but Jason held me back. I could hear sirens in the distance, finally getting closer. Then Mike emerged, coughing but alive, with Luna and her kittens in a laundry basket. He went back in against everyone's shouts to wait for the fire department. 3 more trips he made, bringing out dogs 2 at a time, then Milo and our other cat, all alive, all accounted for. The fire trucks arrived, firefighters jumping out before the vehicles had even fully stopped. They rushed past us into the house, dragging hoses, wearing masks and heavy gear. And then the strangest thing happened. One of them came back out almost immediately, looking confused. He spoke to his captain, who then went in himself. When the captain came back out, he had the same bewildered expression. He came over to where I was sitting on the grass, an oxygen mask now strapped to my face, paramedics checking my burns. "Ma'am," he said, "can you tell me what happened in there?" I tried to explain about the power strip, the oxygen, how quickly it had all happened. He shook his head. "No, I mean, the fire. It's out." "You put it out?" Mike asked. "No," the captain said. "It was out when we got here, completely out, not even smoldering." We all just stared at him. That was impossible. The fire had been raging, spreading rapidly. The bedroom had been engulfed in flames. There was no way it could have just stopped. The firefighters did a thorough check of the house. The damage was contained entirely to our bedroom. The bed was destroyed, the carpet, the nightstand, parts of the wall and ceiling were scorched black. But the fire had not spread beyond that room, despite having plenty of fuel and oxygen. More than that, it had extinguished itself completely. There was no obvious reason why. No sprinkler system. No one had poured water on it. It had simply stopped burning. The fire investigator came the next day while I was in the hospital being treated for second and third degree burns on my hands and arms and smoke inhalation that had aggravated my COPD. He couldn't explain it either. By all natural laws, that fire should have consumed our home and probably everyone in it. 5 years later, I still don't have an explanation for what happened. The doctors say I'm lucky to have full use of my hands after the burns I sustained. The fire department says we're lucky the house didn't burn to the ground. Everyone says we're lucky Mike and Jason came home when they did. But I can't help thinking about those moments right before they arrived, when I closed my eyes and begged for help, when I asked someone, anyone, to save us. I don't know who or what answered. I just know that something did. All the animals survived without a scratch. Even Luna's kittens were perfectly fine. The fire that should have killed us all just stopped, as if someone had simply turned it off. I still think about it almost every day. Still wake up smelling smoke that isn't there. Still look at my scarred hands and remember pulling burning mattress stuffing with my bare fingers. And I still wonder what force stepped in that day when I asked for help. I guess some questions don't have answers, or at least not answers we can understand. Story 15. I never thought I'd be writing this. 2 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be up at 3 in the morning typing out my experiences because I'm too afraid to fall asleep, I would have laughed it off. Now, I'm sitting here with my third cup of coffee, desperately trying to make sense of what's happening to me. It started about 2 years ago. I've always been a light sleeper, but what I'm experiencing now is something entirely different. I live alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of Asheville. It's a beautiful area, nestled in the mountains of North Carolina, the kind of place where people come to find peace. That's what I was looking for too. Peace, connection, something beyond my mundane 9-to-5 existence. The first time it happened, I chalked it up to a random body twitch. You know those sudden jerks your body does sometimes when you're falling asleep? Like you're falling and your body jolts you awake? That's what I thought it was. Except this wasn't just a twitch. It was a surge, like electricity flowing through my entire body at once. Not painful exactly, but intense enough that I sat bolt upright in bed, heart pounding, wondering what the hell just happened. The best way I can describe it is like touching an electric fence, but from the inside. It started at the base of my spine and shot upward, branching out through my limbs until even my fingertips tingled. My muscles contracted involuntarily. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it left me wide awake and deeply unsettled. I did what anyone would do. I Googled it. Electric shocks while falling asleep. Turns out, there's something called hypnic jerks that are pretty common. The articles said they're harmless, just your body misinterpreting the relaxation of muscles as you fall asleep. Your brain thinks you're falling and sends a jolt to wake you up. Made sense. I felt better until it happened again the next night, and the night after that. After a week, I went to my doctor. Blood work, physical exam, even an EKG, everything came back normal. She suggested it might be stress or anxiety and recommended I try meditation before bed to calm my nervous system. That seemed reasonable, so I started meditating. 20 minutes each night before bed, focusing on my breath, clearing my mind. It was nice actually. I felt calmer during the day, more centered. For about 3 weeks, the shocks stopped entirely. I thought I'd solved the problem. Then they came back, worse than before. Not just one shock as I was drifting off, but 2 or 3 in succession. And now there was something else happening alongside them. During these episodes, I became hyper-aware. It's hard to explain, but it's like all my senses dial up to 11 for those few seconds. The ticking of my bedside clock becomes thunderous. The shadows in my room look sharper, more defined. The air feels thicker somehow. It's like being yanked from half sleep into some overcharged state of awareness. One night about 6 months ago, I was almost asleep when it hit me. 3 powerful shocks in rapid succession. Bam, bam, bam. My back arched off the bed, my hands clenched into fists, so tight my nails cut into my palms. The tingling afterward wasn't just on the surface of my skin. It was deeper, almost in my bones. There was pressure in my chest that made me wonder if I was having a heart attack. I was genuinely afraid I might be dying. But the worst part, the part that keeps me up now, was the feeling that I wasn't alone. For those few seconds of the episode, I felt like something else was there with me. Not in my room, but in me. Like something was passing through me, using my body as a conduit maybe, a doorway. It sounds crazy when I type it out, but in those moments, I don't feel like myself. I feel observed from the inside. After that especially bad night, I started keeping a journal, tracking when these episodes happened and what I was doing before bed. The pattern that emerged was unsettling. The shocks were happening more frequently on days when I meditated longer or went deeper into my practice. I'd been doing some reading about opening chakras and energy work, trying to connect with my higher self. What if I'd opened something I shouldn't have? What if I'd somehow made myself vulnerable to something? I stopped meditating completely for a month. The episodes decreased in frequency but didn't stop entirely. They'd happen maybe once a week instead of almost every night. But when they did happen, they seemed more purposeful somehow. Like whatever this was, it was trying harder to get through because I'd limited its access. Last night was the worst it's ever been, and that's why I'm writing this now. I need to get it out, need someone to hear me, even if you all think I'm losing my mind. I'd had a normal day, work, gym, dinner, TV, nothing unusual. I took a shower around 10 and was in bed by 10:30. I was reading on my phone some mindless article about celebrities when my eyelids started getting heavy. I put my phone on the charger, turned off my lamp, and settled down to sleep. I was in that drifting state, not quite asleep but no longer fully awake when the first shock hit. It was stronger than usual, making my whole body go rigid. The familiar tingling followed, but this time it didn't fade. Instead, it intensified, concentrating in my chest and head. The second shock came about 30 seconds later. This one made me gasp for air, like I'd been submerged and was breaking the surface. The third came almost immediately after, and with it, that horrible awareness. The ticking of my clock became so loud I could feel each tick vibrating in my teeth. My ceiling fan, which was barely moving on the lowest setting, sounded like a helicopter above me. The shadows weren't just sharper, they were moving, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. And the air. God, the air felt thick, like I was trying to breathe underwater, but it was the presence that terrified me most. It was stronger than ever before. I could feel it moving through me, exploring, like fingers probing inside my veins. I tried to move, to sit up, to scream, but I couldn't. My body wasn't responding to my commands. I was frozen, trapped inside myself while something else moved through me. And then I heard it, not with my ears, but inside my head. Not a voice exactly, more like a vibration that formed words. Soon. Just that one word, but it sent ice through my veins. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it was over. The pressure released. The sounds returned to normal. The shadows stopped moving. I could move again. I sat up, gasping, drenched in sweat. I turned on every light in my apartment and stayed awake the rest of the night. The thing is, I'm not religious. I've never believed in possession or spirits or anything supernatural. I'm the person who rolls their eyes at ghost stories. But this is happening to me. It's real, and it's getting worse. What scares me most is the realization I had around 4 this morning, as I was making my second pot of coffee. These episodes always happen as I'm falling asleep, when my conscious mind is stepping back and my subconscious is taking over. What if that's the window this thing needs? What if the meditation was just helping me open that window wider, make it easier for whatever this is to get in? And what if it's not just my body it wants? I know this sounds like the ramblings of someone who's sleep-deprived and paranoid. Maybe that's all it is. Maybe there's a perfectly rational explanation, some weird neurological thing that doesn't show up on standard tests. But it doesn't feel that way. It feels like something is trying to use me, to get through me to something else. I've started looking into local neurologists, hoping to find someone who specializes in sleep disorders. I've also, and I can't believe I'm doing this, contacted a local paranormal investigator. I feel ridiculous even typing that, but I'm desperate. I need answers. In the meantime, I've been researching ways to protect myself, salt lines at the doors and windows, iron over my bed, protective symbols from half a dozen religions drawn on paper and stuck to my walls. I don't know if any of it will work, but it makes me feel like I'm doing something. I can't avoid sleep forever. Eventually, exhaustion will win, and I'll drift off. And then what? Will it be there, waiting? Will it say something else? Will it take more than just a moment of my consciousness next time? What if one day I go to sleep and whatever I am when I wake up isn't really me anymore? It's 5 in the morning now. The sun will be up soon. I feel safer in daylight, though I can't explain why. Maybe because these episodes only happen in the dark, as I'm falling asleep. Maybe the thing, if there is a thing, can only reach me then. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know if it's medical or psychological or something else. All I know is that I'm afraid to close my eyes, afraid of what's waiting for me in that space between wakefulness and sleep, and I'm terrified of what that voice meant by soon. Story 16. I've never told this story to anyone outside my family. I'm not even sure why I'm writing it down now, but maybe it'll help me make sense of what happened. It's been 23 years, but I still remember every detail like it happened yesterday. I was 9 years old, living in our old Victorian house in Oxfordshire. It was a creaky place, all high ceilings and drafty hallways, the kind of house that makes noises at night that your parents tell you are just the house settling. But sometimes I think old houses remember things. That night started like any other. It was autumn, late October, if I remember correctly. My mum had tucked me in around 8:30 and I was lying in bed flipping through a Roald Dahl book with my little bedside lamp on. Nothing unusual, just a normal Tuesday night. I remember putting my book down and reaching to turn off the lamp when I noticed something off. My duvet, which had been all rumpled up around me, suddenly went completely flat. And I don't mean just sort of smoothed out, I mean perfectly flat, like someone had ironed it while it was still on the bed. Not a single wrinkle or fold. This happened in seconds, right before my eyes. I froze. I couldn't even breathe. I just stared at my duvet, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then it got worse. Symbols started appearing on the surface of my duvet. They weren't being drawn by anything I could see. They just materialized, one after another, rapidly spreading across the fabric. They weren't any kind of writing I recognized, not English letters or anything I'd seen in books. They were angular, with strange curves and lines that seemed to shift if I tried to focus on any one of them too long. Even now, trying to recall those symbols makes me feel sick. There's a weird pressure behind my eyes whenever I try to picture them, like my brain is refusing to process the memory properly. The symbols kept appearing for maybe 20 seconds, and then everything just stopped. The duvet remained flat, but the symbols faded. I thought it was over, and I remember letting out this tiny, shaky breath I'd been holding. That's when I felt the weight on the foot of my bed. It wasn't heavy, just the distinct sensation of someone sitting down. The mattress dipped slightly, and I felt the pressure against my feet through the duvet. But there was nobody there, nothing visible at least. I tried to scream. I swear I tried, but my voice wouldn't work. My entire body felt paralyzed, like in those nightmares where you try to run but can't move your legs. Except this wasn't a nightmare. I was wide awake, and this was really happening. The room temperature dropped dramatically. I could see my breath coming out in little clouds, even though it was a mild night and our heating was on. That's when the light started. It wasn't like someone had turned on a lamp. It was more like the air itself was becoming luminous, a soft, bluish-white glow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And in that light, I began to see shapes, figures leaning over my bed. They were tall, much taller than any adult I knew, and thin, so impossibly thin. I couldn't make out distinct features, just these elongated silhouettes surrounding my bed. 3 or 4 of them, I think. They were positioned around me like doctors around a patient, all looking down. I remember thinking exactly that they looked like doctors about to perform surgery. There was something so clinical, so observational about how they stood there. They didn't make any threatening moves. They didn't reach for me. They just watched. And somehow, that was worse than if they had tried to grab me. The absolute silence, the methodical way they surrounded me. It felt like I was being studied, like a specimen under glass. I don't know how long we stayed like that, me frozen in terror, them standing around my bed in that eerie light. Time seemed to stretch and distort. It could have been minutes or seconds. Then one of them, the one standing near the head of my bed, tilted its head slightly, just a small movement, but something about it broke the spell of paralysis that had gripped me. Suddenly, I could move again. I don't remember making the conscious decision to run. One moment I was lying there, and the next I was bolting for the door, not even touching the floor until I was halfway down the corridor. I was screaming, but not words at first, just raw, animal terror. By the time I reached the stairs, my brain caught up with my body, and I found my voice. "They're gonna get me! They're gonna get me!" I kept screaming it over and over as I thundered down the staircase, not even thinking about where I was going. I must have been heading for the front door because my mum caught me in the entrance hall. She grabbed me just before I could reach for the latch. I was still in my pajamas, barefoot and frantic, trying to escape whatever was upstairs. Zoe, what's wrong?" She kept asking me, holding me tight as I struggled. "What's happening? Who's going to get you?" I couldn't explain. Every time I tried to describe what I'd seen, I'd start hyperventilating. All I could say was, "My room. They're in my room. Don't make me go back." My dad went upstairs to check. Of course, he found nothing. No figures, no strange light, no symbols on my duvet, just my rumpled bed with my book lying open on the floor where I'd dropped it. I refused to sleep in my room that night, or the next night, or the night after that. For almost 2 weeks, I slept on a makeshift bed on my parents' floor. They tried everything to convince me it was just a nightmare, but I knew better. I had been awake. It had been real. Eventually, as kids do, I started to doubt myself. Maybe it had been a dream. Maybe I'd fallen asleep reading and had a particularly vivid nightmare. The memory remained crystal clear, but the older I got, the more I tried to rationalize it. That is, until I turned 16. My mum and I were in the kitchen making dinner together. I can't remember how the subject came up. I think we were talking about weird dreams or something, and I mentioned that time I freaked out about the people in my room. My mum went completely still. The knife she was using to chop vegetables paused mid-air. She turned to look at me with this expression I'd never seen before, part fear, part recognition. "What exactly did you see that night?" she asked, her voice unnaturally calm. So I told her. Everything. The duvet going flat, the symbols, the weight on the bed, the figures surrounding me like doctors. As I spoke, her face got paler and paler. When I finished, she put down the knife with trembling hands and sat at the kitchen table. "When I was 9, she said slowly, "the exact same thing happened to me." I thought she was joking at first, but my mum isn't the type to joke about things like that. She described her experience, and it was identical to mine in almost every detail. The bed covers going flat. Strange symbols she couldn't quite remember afterward. The sensation of being watched by tall observational figures. The clinical feeling of being examined. The only difference was that she hadn't been able to break free and run. She'd remained paralyzed until morning, when the figures and the light simply faded away. "I never told anyone," she said, "not even your grandmother. I convinced myself it was just a nightmare." We sat in silence for a long time after that. "What do you say when you discover something like that? That whatever visited me had visited my mother a generation earlier in exactly the same way?" We've researched it since then, discreetly, looking into family histories, paranormal experiences, anything that might explain what happened to both of us at the same age. We've found nothing conclusive. Sometimes I wonder if it's something genetic, some kind of shared hallucination triggered at a specific developmental stage. Other times, I'm convinced it was something real, entities from somewhere else who have some kind of interest in our family line. The worst part is not knowing if it stops with me or if someday, when I have a daughter who turns 9, she'll experience the same visitation. The thought keeps me up at night sometimes. I've never seen them again, but occasionally I'll wake up in the middle of the night with that same feeling of being watched, of being studied, and I'll look at my covers, half expecting to see them go completely, impossibly flat. I don't know what they wanted from us, my mother and me. I don't know why they came or if they'll come back. All I know is that it was real, and somewhere out there, they're watching, waiting. For what? I don't know, and that terrifies me more than anything else. Story 17. I still get cold sweats thinking about what happened to me 3 months ago. I've tried talking to friends about it, but they just give me that look, you know the one, like I've totally lost it. Maybe writing it down will help me process everything. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I need to get this off my chest. I'm a software developer in Chicago, and the burnout had been creeping up on me for months. 60-hour work weeks, constant deadlines, and a boss who thought weekends were just another opportunity to send urgent emails. By April, I was at my breaking point, jumpy, irritable, and surviving on energy drinks. When my therapist suggested a solo getaway, I immediately opened Airbnb and started scrolling. That's when I found it, a log cabin in rural Wisconsin, about 4 hours from the city. Rustic retreat in private woods, the listing said. Disconnect and recharge. The photos showed this charming wooden structure with a wraparound porch surrounded by thick pine trees. The host, Gerald, had minimal reviews, but all 5 stars. The place was surprisingly cheap for a whole cabin, which should have been my first red flag. I booked it for 2 weeks, the longest vacation I'd taken in years. The drive up was actually pleasant. As I got further from the city, I could feel some of the tension leaving my shoulders. The GPS led me down progressively smaller roads until I was on a dirt path that didn't even appear on Google Maps. The cabin sat in a small clearing, looking exactly like the photos, maybe even more picturesque in person. I remember thinking it was perfect as I carried my bags in. The interior was all knotty pine with a stone fireplace, comfy-looking furniture, and this wall of windows facing the forest. There was no TV or internet as advertised, just some bookshelves filled with old classics and nature guides. The kitchen was basic but functional, and the bedroom had this massive 4-poster bed that looked antique. That first afternoon was honestly great. I unpacked, made a simple dinner, and sat on the porch watching the sunset through the trees. The silence was incredible after months of city noise. I could actually hear birds, wind in the trees, the occasional rustle of animals in the underbrush. I went to bed that night feeling more relaxed than I had in months, but I woke up around 3 in the morning to a loud creaking sound. At first, I thought it was just the cabin settling. Old buildings make noise, right? But it wasn't random. It sounded like footsteps crossing the living room floor, slow, deliberate steps that stopped right outside my bedroom door. I lay there frozen, heart pounding in my ears. After what felt like forever, I gathered the courage to get up and check. I flipped on lights as I went, half expecting to find an intruder. But there was nothing. The front door was still locked with the chain on. No windows were broken. I was completely alone. I convinced myself it was just my city brain not being used to country noises and went back to bed. But I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. The next day was fine. I hiked around the property, read for a while, and tried to relax. But as the sun started to set, I noticed something odd. There was this smell in the cabin I couldn't place. Kind of sweet, but with this metallic undertone, like copper pennies. It wasn't overpowering, but it was definitely there, especially in the corners of rooms. That night, I was washing up in the bathroom when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. I raised my hand to brush my teeth, and my reflection in the mirror moved a split second too late. Just the tiniest delay, but enough that I noticed. I blinked hard, thinking my tired brain was playing tricks on me. But when I tried again, waving my hand slowly, there it was. That millisecond delay. Like my reflection was struggling to keep up. I told myself I was being paranoid and went to bed early. But at exactly midnight, I checked my phone. I heard those footsteps again. This time, they crossed from the front door to the big window facing the woods. I got up, heart racing, and peeked through my bedroom door. There, silhouetted against the window, was a figure. Not inside the cabin, but outside, standing at the edge of the trees, perfectly still and staring directly at the cabin. At me. It was too dark to make out details, but something about the proportions was wrong. Too tall and thin to be a normal person. I ducked back into my room, locked the door, and didn't sleep a wink. When morning came, I seriously considered packing up and leaving. But Gerald had a strict no-refund policy, and I'd paid for 2 weeks. Plus, in the daylight, everything seemed normal again. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination and decided to stay. Big mistake. Over the next few days, things got progressively weirder. I noticed the paintings on the walls, landscapes mostly, seemed different when I wasn't looking directly at them. From the corner of my eye, the peaceful forest scenes would transform into twisted, gnarled trees with what looked like faces in the bark. But when I'd turn to look at them head-on, they'd be normal again. The floor creaking continued every night at midnight, and every night that figure would be standing at the edge of the woods, watching, never moving closer, never leaving, just watching. After the 3rd night, I decided to confront whatever it was. I waited until midnight, then went out onto the porch with my phone's flashlight. There was nothing there, no figure, no footprints, nothing unusual at all. But the moment I stepped back inside, I felt it again, that presence watching me from the trees. About a week in, something really disturbing happened. I was making dinner, chopping vegetables, when I nicked my finger. Just a small cut, but it bled a bit. As I went to wash it off, I swear the cabin seemed to respond. The smell, that sweet metallic smell, got stronger. The floorboards creaked like someone taking a deep breath. And for just a moment, I felt this wave of what I can only describe as hunger roll through the room. That night, I tried to leave. I packed my bags, threw them in the car, and turned the key. Nothing happened. The engine wouldn't start, no clicking, no turnover, nothing. The battery was fine, the lights and radio worked, but the car simply refused to start. I had no cell service to call for help. I was stuck. When I went back inside, defeated, the cabin felt different. warmer, almost welcoming, like it was pleased I had returned. The next day I spent hours trying to fix my car, but I couldn't find anything wrong with it. As the sun started to set, I felt this strange pull toward the cabin. Not like mind control or anything, but this nagging feeling that there was something I needed to find inside. That's when I noticed a rug in the living room was slightly askew. When I moved it, I found a trap door I hadn't noticed before. It had a rusted iron ring as a handle. Against every horror movie instinct I had, I pulled it open. A set of narrow wooden stairs led down into darkness. Using my phone's flashlight, I descended into what looked like a root cellar carved directly into the bedrock beneath the cabin. The air was cold and damp, and that sweet metallic smell was overwhelming here. The walls were covered in symbols I'd never seen before, not quite letters or runes, but definitely man-made. They seemed to ripple in my flashlight beam, like they were carved into something liquid rather than stone. In the center of the room sat a small wooden table with a single item on it, a leather-bound book that looked ancient. The cover was stained dark with what I desperately hoped wasn't blood. I should have left it alone. I know that now, but I opened it. Most of the pages were filled with the same strange symbols from the walls, but in the middle of the book was a drawing of the cabin, perfectly detailed, like someone had spent years getting every knot in the wood just right. In the drawing, the figure from the woods was visible through the window, inside the cabin now, staring out at the viewer with hollow eyes. I felt the air behind me grow cold. I turned around slowly, already knowing what I would see. It stood at the bottom of the stairs, the figure from the woods. In the dim light, I could finally see it clearly. It had the general shape of a human, but was impossibly tall and thin, its skin pale like it had never seen sunlight. Its face was almost normal except for the eyes, completely black and too large for its face. I couldn't move as it glided toward me. It reached out one long, bony hand and touched my face. Its skin was freezing, yet burning at the same time. The moment it made contact, my mind was flooded with images, memories that weren't mine. I saw the cabin being built hundreds of years ago, not as a home, but as a prison. A place to trap something that had challenged what the builder called the natural order. I felt centuries of solitude and rage, decades of watching hikers and travelers pass by, unable to interact, and then more recently, a clever plan, becoming visible on modern apps like Airbnb, luring in guests who might provide company. The entity wasn't a ghost. It wasn't dead and had never been human. It was something older, something trapped in an endless cycle of suffering. And now it had found me. I must have passed out because I woke up the next morning in my bed. My first instinct was to run, but surprisingly, I felt no fear anymore, just a deep sadness and understanding. I packed my things, and this time when I tried to start my car, it purred to life immediately. As I drove away, I looked back at the cabin one last time. In the upstairs window, I saw two figures watching me leave, the entity and what appeared to be me or some version of me. Both of them raised a hand in farewell. It's been 3 months since I left. My life has gone back to normal on the surface. I'm back at work, seeing friends, doing all the regular things. But something's different. Sometimes I catch my reflection moving a fraction too slowly. Sometimes I smell that sweet metallic scent when I'm alone at night. And sometimes, just sometimes, when I look at photos from my trip, I can see a second figure standing beside me in pictures where I know I was alone. I think part of me never left that cabin, and I think part of that cabin came home with me. Story 18. I've never told this story to anyone online before. I still get chills thinking about what happened, and I'm honestly scared that writing this down might make things worse. But I need to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. This happened about 7 years ago when I was 17 and living with my parents in Victoria, BC. I was a pretty normal teenager, into video games, hanging out with friends, nothing special. My best friend at the time was Alex, who lived about a 15-minute bike ride from my house. One Friday afternoon in October, I was at Alex's place playing video games when I noticed he seemed off. He kept looking over his shoulder and jumping at small noises. When I finally asked him what was wrong, he shut off the game and told me he needed to talk about something weird that had been happening. "Jeremy, I saw something last night and I don't know what to do about it," he said, his voice shaking a bit. He wasn't the type to get scared easily, so seeing him this rattled made me uneasy. He told me that for the past 3 nights, he'd been woken up by scratching sounds at his window. The first 2 nights he just ignored it, figuring it was tree branches or something, but last night he'd gotten up to check. "There was this thing on the other side of the glass," he said. "At first I thought it was a cat, but it wasn't. It had no hair, like completely smooth skin, and its eyes, man. They were red, not like bloodshot, but actually glowing red. I remember laughing nervously, thinking he was trying to freak me out, but Alex wasn't laughing. He described how the creature had these weird 3-toed claws that seemed too long for its body, and a tail that reminded him more of a lizard than a cat. When he turned on his bedside lamp, the thing had skittered away. I know how this sounds," he said, "but I swear I wasn't dreaming. I couldn't sleep after that." I tried to be supportive, suggesting maybe it was some kind of sick animal or a raccoon that looked weird in the dark. Alex just shook his head and said, "Just be careful, okay? I feel like it's watching me." I left his house a couple hours later as it was getting dark. The whole ride home I kept thinking about what Alex had described. By the time I got home, I'd almost convinced myself he was playing an elaborate prank on me. That night, I stayed up late watching horror movies. Probably not the smartest choice after the conversation with Alex. My parents were having dinner with friends and said they wouldn't be back until late, so I had the house to myself except for our cat, Bandit, who was wandering around somewhere. Around midnight, I finally headed to bed. My room was on the 2nd floor with a window that faced the backyard. I remember checking that the window was locked before getting into bed. Not something I normally did, but Alex's story had me on edge. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, I was jerking awake to a low growling sound. My digital clock read 3:17 in the morning. The house was completely silent except for that growl which seemed to be coming from the corner of my room. My first thought was that it was Bandit. He sometimes made weird noises when hunting bugs. "Bandit," I whispered, squinting into the darkness. In the shadows by my closet, I could make out what looked like a cat sitting there, watching me, but something felt wrong. The proportions weren't quite right. It was bigger than Bandit, with a longer neck, and its eyes. Even in the darkness, I could see they were reflecting light in a yellow-reddish glow. Bandit's eyes always reflected green. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. The creature didn't move, just kept staring at me with those unblinking eyes. I reached slowly for my phone on the nightstand, thinking I could use the flashlight, but as soon as I moved, the thing made that growling sound again, deeper this time, almost like it was coming from something much larger than what I was seeing. "Go away," I said, trying to sound firm despite how terrified I was. My voice cracked embarrassingly. The thing tilted its head at an angle that seemed impossible for a normal cat. That's when I noticed its ears. They were too pointed, almost like horns. I pulled my blanket up higher, feeling like a little kid afraid of the monster in the closet. I kept telling myself it was just Bandit looking weird in the darkness, or maybe a stray that had somehow gotten in. But deep down, I knew it wasn't either of those things. I must have eventually fallen back asleep from sheer exhaustion. I don't remember closing my eyes, but I remember the feeling of something heavy jumping onto my bed just as I was drifting off. It felt like when a cat jumps up and settles near your feet, that distinct depression in the mattress. I was too terrified to look, so I just lay there completely still, feeling whatever it was lying against my legs. The weight was wrong, though. Heavier than Bandit, and the warmth coming from it was too intense, like a hot water bottle. When I woke up the next morning, there was nothing there. Sunlight was streaming through my window, making the whole thing feel like a nightmare. I probably would have convinced myself that's all it was, except for 2 things. First, when I went downstairs for breakfast, my mom asked me if I'd heard the weird noises during the night. "Sounded like an animal got in," she said. "Your dad checked the house but couldn't find anything." The second thing, when I asked if Bandit had been in their room last night, my mom nodded. He slept on my pillow all night, wouldn't leave my side for some reason. I felt sick. If Bandit had been with my mom all night, then what the hell had I seen in my room? I didn't tell my parents about what happened. What was I supposed to say? Hey, I think there was a demon cat in my room last night. They'd think I was crazy or on drugs or something. But I did tell my friend Mike when we met up at the mall that afternoon. I needed to tell someone, and Mike was always into weird paranormal stuff. As I described what happened, I noticed his expression change from interested to genuinely disturbed. "Dude, that's messed up," he said when I finished. "You don't think it could be the same thing Alex saw?" I hadn't even considered that, but once Mike said it, the connection seemed obvious. The timing, the similarity in appearance, it was too much to be coincidence. "Maybe you should stay at my place tonight," Mike offered. I agreed immediately. The thought of spending another night in my room alone was too much. That night at Mike's, we stayed up late talking about what it could be. Mike had all these theories about interdimensional beings and shapeshifters. I was just relieved to not be alone. We eventually fell asleep around 2 in the morning with the TV still on. The next day was Sunday, and I had to go home. My parents would get suspicious if I tried to stay away another night. I dreaded going back to my room, but I figured if I kept the lights on and maybe set up my laptop to record while I slept, I'd feel safer. Nothing happened that night, or the night after that. After a week of nothing, I started to relax, thinking maybe it had just been my imagination running wild after Alex's story. Then Mike called me. His voice was shaky when I answered. "Jeremy, I need to talk to you," he said. "Something happened last night." My stomach dropped. Mike told me he'd woken up around 3 in the morning to find something sitting on his desk chair watching him. Something that looked like a cat but wasn't. Something with yellowish red eyes and skin that seemed to shift in the darkness. "It just sat there staring at me," he said. Then it made this sound. Not a meow or a growl, more like. I don't know how to describe it. Like someone trying to talk with a mouthful of water. It vanished when he turned on his light, he said, but he swore he felt it watching him for the rest of the night. That's when I started to connect the dots. Alex had seen it first, then he told me about it, and I saw it next. Then I told Mike, and now he was seeing it too. It was like the thing was being passed along through the telling of its story. Over the next month I did some research. I looked into local legends, supernatural creatures, anything that might explain what we were experiencing. I found stories about shapeshifters and demonic entities that could take animal forms, but nothing that matched exactly what we'd seen. Alex stopped seeing his creature after he told me about it, and after a few weeks, Mike stopped experiencing anything too. It was like once the story was passed on, the entity moved with it. I was careful not to tell anyone else about what happened. Not until today, 7 years later, typing this out. I'm still not sure why I'm doing this now. Maybe because even though I haven't seen that thing again, I still feel it sometimes, every now and then, usually when I'm just about to fall asleep. I feel that distinctive weight land on my bed, that too warm presence settling near my feet. It never stays long, just enough to remind me it's still there, waiting. I've gotten used to it in a way, but I never look down when it happens. I'm afraid of what I might see. The strangest part is that sometimes I catch myself wanting to tell someone about it face to face, not online like this, but in person. It's like there's this urge to pass the story along to make someone else understand, and then I remember how it spreads, and I stop myself. I've moved 3 times since then, different cities, different apartments. It doesn't matter, that feeling still finds me. I'm sorry if sharing this story here means I've passed something on to you. Maybe that's why I feel compelled to write it down now. Maybe the thing wants me to, but I need to know if anyone else has experienced this. A creature that looks almost like a cat but isn't. A thing that follows stories. I still talk to Mike occasionally. A few months ago, he asked me if I ever still think about what happened. When I told him about still feeling the weight on my bed sometimes, he got really quiet. Then he admitted something. He'd told his girlfriend about it last year. Since then, he hasn't felt anything, but she started waking up at night, swearing there's something watching her from the corner of the room. I don't know what this thing is. I don't know what it wants or why it moves from person to person through stories. All I know is that 7 years later, I still sleep with the lights on, and I still feel it watching me. Story 19. I've been debating whether to share this for months. Even typing it out makes my hands shake. I know how it's going to sound. Believe me, I'd think I was crazy too if I hadn't lived through it. But I need to tell someone who might understand, or at least not immediately dismiss me. I worked at Pinecrest Daycare for just over a year. It's this small operation in a converted house in a town where everyone knows everyone. On paper, it seemed perfect. Close to home, decent pay for childcare work, and I genuinely love kids. The first few weeks were pretty normal, exhausting, as anyone who's worked with toddlers knows, but normal. The daycare had 5 rooms designated by age group, T1 through T5, with T5 being the oldest toddler group, 2 to 3-year-olds. I floated between rooms at first, but eventually got assigned primarily to T5. From day one, something felt off about that room. Not anything I could point to specifically, just this heaviness that would settle over me when I walked in. I brushed it off as being overwhelmed by the particularly rowdy group of kids. They were more aggressive than the others, constantly fighting and having these explosive tantrums that seemed to come out of nowhere. The first thing I couldn't explain happened during nap time about 2 months in. I was sitting at the little table in the corner doing paperwork while the kids slept on their mats. The room has this tiny kitchenette area with a sink for washing hands and cups. I clearly heard dishes clinking together, the unmistakable sound of ceramic mugs touching. I looked up, expecting to see one of the other teachers, but there was nobody there, just the empty sink, the sleeping kids, and me. I got up and checked. Nothing disturbed, no dishes moved, no water running. I told myself it must have come from another room, but the walls were thick in this old house, and the other rooms were too far away to hear something that specific. A week later, I was putting away art supplies when the closet door next to me slowly opened on its own. Not like it wasn't latched properly and drifted open. It was completely closed, and then it just opened, smooth and deliberate. I closed it, checked the latch, and it stayed shut, but I felt so cold suddenly that I had goosebumps running up my arms in the middle of a warm October day. Around this time, I started having health problems, really personal stuff, reproductive issues that had my doctor concerned, dizzy spells that would hit out of nowhere, double vision that made it hard to drive home sometimes. The weird thing was these symptoms only happened at work, and they were always worse in T5. I'd be fine all morning in T3, then step into T5 after lunch and immediately feel like the room was spinning. I mentioned some of this to Eliza, an older woman who'd been at Pinecrest for about 5 years. We were cleaning up after hours one day, and I casually brought up the weird closet door incident. I expected her to laugh it off, but instead, she got really quiet. Then she asked if I'd heard the dishes too. My blood went cold. I hadn't told anyone about the dishes. Eliza said she'd experienced the same things. Dishes clinking when nobody was there, doors opening on their own. But what really freaked me out was when she told me about the voice. She and her daughter, who used to work there too, had both heard it. A deep voice speaking from the ceiling, not clear words, just murmuring, but definitely a voice. Her daughter had quit after hearing it 3 times in 1 week. Then Eliza told me something that made everything click in the worst possible way. A teacher who worked in T5 before me had experienced 2 miscarriages while working there. No explanation, no medical reason. She quit, got pregnant again, and carried to term with no issues. At this point, I was having severe cramping and irregular periods that had started exactly when I began working primarily in T5. I should have quit right then, I know that now. But I needed the job, and part of me still wanted to believe there was a logical explanation. Maybe it was the cleaning chemicals or something in the building materials. Maybe. Things got worse over the next month. The dizziness became constant in T5. I started getting these sharp pains in my abdomen that would only subside after I left the building. I'd wake up feeling fine, drive to work okay, then step inside and immediately feel this crushing depression settle over me. Not just sadness, this was like a physical weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. During nap time, I started seeing things, not full apparitions or anything that dramatic, just visions. I'd be sitting there watching the kids and suddenly I'd see knives cutting into my skin. I could feel it, the sharp pain, the warm blood. I'd look down expecting to see cuts, but my arms were fine, untouched. One day I felt like something was choking me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't call for help. My vision started going black around the edges. Then one of the kids woke up crying, and suddenly I could breathe again. The kids felt it too, I'm sure of it. They just didn't understand what they were feeling. They'd be playing normally, then suddenly stop and stare at the ceiling for no reason. Sometimes they'd burst into tears for no apparent cause. One little boy, Jake, refused to go to the bathroom alone because the dark gets mad. We thought he was just afraid of the dark until he elaborated, "The dark has teeth." The moment that still gives me nightmares happened about 3 weeks before I finally quit. Little Emma, normally the sweetest and most articulate kid in the class, was standing in the doorway between the main room and the kitchenette area. She was frozen there, pointing into the empty kitchenette. "Emma, what are you looking at?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She turned to me with this eerily calm expression and said, "There's a ghost in there. He's looking at you." I felt that familiar cold wave wash over me. I picked her up and moved us both away from the doorway, trying to distract her with a book, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched for the rest of the day. The following week, I saw it. I actually saw it. It was nap time again, always nap time, when the room was quiet and still. I was sitting in my usual spot when movement caught my eye. In the corner near the ceiling, there was this shape. A black diamond with blurry edges, like smoke that couldn't quite decide on a form, except for what I can only describe as its head, a cross between a vulture skull and a plague doctor mask. It had no eyes that I could see, just these empty sockets, but I knew it was looking at me, studying me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I just sat there frozen as it slowly faded back into the corner. After that day, I started noticing physical changes in the room when I'd arrive each morning. Toys we'd put away would be scattered across the floor, chairs pushed away from tables. Once, all the children's cubby labels had been switched around. The director blamed the night cleaning crew, but I'd seen them work. They were thorough and respectful of the classroom setup. The breaking point came when I found scratches on my stomach after a particularly bad day in T5.3 parallel lines. Shallow, but definitely not there when I'd showered that morning. That same day, Jake had refused to nap, sobbing that the ceiling man wouldn't let him sleep. I handed in my notice the next day. I couldn't explain why without sounding insane, so I made up something about moving to another town. The director seemed disappointed but not surprised. They'd had unusually high turnover in T5. My last 2 weeks were hell. Whatever was in that room seemed to know I was leaving and ramped up its efforts. The pain was nearly constant. I had migraines that made me vomit, and the dreams, God, the dreams. Every night I dreamed of being trapped in T5 while something with that bird skull face circled above me, getting closer and closer. On my final day, something happened that I still can't explain. All the children were napping except for Emma, who was sitting up on her mat staring at the ceiling. I followed her gaze and saw that shape again, darker and more defined than before. Emma looked at me, then back at the ceiling, and said in a voice that wasn't quite hers, "It doesn't want you to go." At that exact moment, every single child in the room woke up simultaneously and started screaming, not crying, screaming in terror. I grabbed the classroom phone to call for help, but it was dead. The lights flickered, and I swear the temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. I gathered the children into a corner, trying to calm them while keeping my eyes on that thing in the ceiling. It started to descend. I could see it more clearly now. That skull-like face, the diamond-shaped body that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I stood in front of the children, not knowing what else to do, when the door burst open. It was Eliza, saying she'd heard the screaming from 2 rooms away. The moment she entered, the shape vanished and the lights stabilized. We never spoke about what happened. How could we? But Eliza helped me get the kids calmed down and stayed with me for the rest of the day. As I was leaving for the last time, she pressed a small stone into my hand, some kind of protection amulet, she said. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. It's been 3 months since I quit. My health problems disappeared almost immediately. The nightmares lingered for a while, but have mostly stopped. Sometimes I drive by Pinecrest and wonder if they've found someone new for T5, if that person is experiencing the same things. I've thought about warning them somehow, but what would I even say? I still don't know what was in that room. I don't want to know. All I know is that something was there, something that didn't want me to leave, something that fed on fear and pain. And sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I swear I can hear dishes clinking in my empty kitchen. Story 20. I've never told this to anyone outside my therapist, but something happened to me 10 years ago that I still can't explain. I was 17, just a normal high school junior with normal teenage problems. This wasn't supposed to be one of them. It was a Friday night in October, and I was staying at my best friend Lily's house. We'd been friends since elementary school, and I'd probably slept over at her place 100 times before. Her house was this older 2-story place in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing special, nothing that would make you think twice about it. When you walked in through the front door, there was a living room to the left, and then a short hallway leading to the stairs. Directly ahead through that hallway was this big room that Lily's family just used for storage. Boxes of Christmas decorations, old furniture, stuff they didn't know what to do with but couldn't throw away. That room was right underneath Lily's bedroom. There was also a small kitchen connected to that storage room. Upstairs, Lily's dad's bedroom was on the right at the top of the stairs, and Lily's room was on the left. There was also a bathroom at the end of a short landing off Lily's bedroom. That night had been completely normal. We ordered pizza, watched stupid horror movies, ironically enough, and stayed up talking about boys and school drama, standard sleepover stuff. Around 1 in the morning, we finally decided to call it a night. Lily's dad had gone to bed hours earlier, and the house was completely quiet. We were both in Lily's bed. She had a queen size, so there was plenty of room. I remember being tired, but not immediately falling asleep. I was just lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to Lily's breathing getting deeper as she drifted off. That's when I heard it for the first time. A dull thud. Then a scraping sound like something heavy being dragged across the floor. It was coming from directly below us, from that storage room. At first I thought maybe it was the house settling or something. Old houses make weird noises, right? But then it happened again. Thud. And then that scraping noise, slow and deliberate, moving a few feet across the floor below us. I tensed up immediately. It definitely wasn't the house settling. This sounded like something physically moving down there. "Lily," I whispered, nudging her shoulder. "Do you hear that?" She mumbled, half asleep. "Hear what?" And then it happened again. Thud, scrap. "That," I whispered urgently, "that noise downstairs." Lily lifted her head slightly, listened for a moment, then flopped back down. "I don't hear anything. Go to sleep, Olivia." I couldn't believe she couldn't hear it. It wasn't subtle. As if to prove my point, the sound came again, louder this time. Thud, scrap. It had moved closer to the hallway. My heart started racing. I knew Lily's dad was asleep upstairs, so it couldn't be him. They didn't have pets. There shouldn't be anything moving around down there. "Lily, seriously, there's something downstairs," I insisted, my voice shaking a little. She sighed heavily, the way people do when they're trying not to be annoyed. "It's just the house. It's old. Go to sleep." But I couldn't let it go because the sound was changing. It had reached the hallway now, and I could hear it moving toward the stairs. Thud, scrappy, like something heavy taking one step, then dragging itself forward. I sat up in bed, my whole body tense. "Lily, something's coming up the stairs." She groaned and pulled the covers over her head. "There's nothing there, Olivia. You're freaking yourself out because of those dumb movies we watched." Maybe she was right. Maybe my imagination was running wild after all those horror films. But then why could I hear it so clearly? The sound had definitely reached the stairs now. Thud, scrape. It was on the first step. Thud, scrape. Second step. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Time seemed to slow down as I tracked the progress of whatever was climbing those stairs. One deliberate step at a time, always the same pattern. A heavy thud followed by that awful scraping sound. I was crying now, silent tears running down my face. I wanted to wake Lily up again, shake her until she heard it too. But some instinct told me to stay absolutely still, to pretend I was asleep. Like maybe if whatever was coming up those stairs thought I was unconscious, it would leave me alone. Thud, scrap. Halfway up the stairs now, my entire body was trembling. I was lying down again, eyes squeezed shut, trying to control my breathing so it would seem like I was asleep. But my heart was pounding so hard, I was sure anything within a mile radius could hear it. The scariest part was that I somehow knew that whatever was making those sounds was aware of me. Not just that someone was in the house, it knew I was there, specifically. It knew I was listening. It knew I was afraid. Thud, scrape. It had almost reached the top of the stairs. I don't know how to explain the feeling that came over me then. It was like the air in the room had gotten heavy and cold, like there was a pressure pushing down on everything. I couldn't have moved if I wanted to. Thud, scrape. It was at the top of the stairs now. I held my breath and stared into the darkness, my eyes fixed on the closed bedroom door. I was terrified that any second that door would start to open, that I would finally see what had been making those sounds, and somehow I knew that seeing it would be the worst thing that could possibly happen. The sound stopped. There was just silence, but I could feel it out there, standing at the top of the stairs, just a few feet from Lily's door, waiting. I don't know how long I lay there, not daring to breathe, listening to that terrible silence. It might have been minutes or hours. Time didn't seem to work right anymore. Then finally, it moved again. Thud, scrape. But it didn't come toward Lily's door. Instead, it moved toward the bathroom at the end of the landing. I heard it drag itself along that same awful rhythm until it reached the bathroom door, and then nothing. The sound just stopped, and suddenly, like someone had flipped a switch, the heavy feeling in the air vanished. I could breathe again. The room felt normal. Whatever had been out there was gone. I still didn't move. I lay awake the entire night, staring at the bedroom door, waiting for the sound to return. It never did. When morning finally came, I was exhausted and strung out from fear and lack of sleep. Lily woke up completely normal, like nothing had happened. "You look terrible," she said when she saw me. "Did you sleep at all?" I tried to tell her about what I'd heard, but she just looked at me like I was crazy. "You probably had a nightmare," she said, "or you were half asleep and thought you heard something." I wanted to believe that. I really did, but I know what I heard. I was wide awake, and those sounds were real. The weird thing is, I stayed at Lily's house plenty of times after that night. I was nervous the first few times, sure, but nothing like that ever happened again. I never felt afraid to be there, which doesn't make sense if the place was haunted or something, right? I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was someone trying to break in, but why would a burglar drag themselves up the stairs like that? And how did they leave without making any noise? Plus, nothing was missing or disturbed the next morning. The fact that it never happened again makes it almost worse somehow. If it had been a recurring thing, maybe we could have figured out what it was. Some weird plumbing issue or a raccoon in the attic or something. But as a one-time event, it just exists in my memory, unexplained and unresolved. I'm 27 now. And I still think about that night sometimes. Still wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear that sound again. Thud, scrape, thud, scrape. But it's never real. I've told myself all the logical explanations. It was just a dream. It was my imagination. It was the house settling. But none of them feel right. None of them explain why I felt so certain that whatever was making that noise knew I was listening. Why it felt like it was there specifically for me. The human mind can play tricks. I know that. But 10 years later, I still remember every detail of that night with perfect clarity. The sound of something heavy dragging itself up those stairs. The way the air seemed to change when it reached the top. The absolute certainty that if it had opened Lily's bedroom door, I would have seen something I wasn't meant to see. I don't have answers. Just the memory of lying in the dark, listening to something impossible making its way toward me, one heavy step at a time. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night in my own apartment, I find myself holding my breath, listening for that sound again. Thud, scrap. Story 21. I've never considered myself someone who believes in the paranormal. As an Air Force officer, I was trained to analyze situations logically, to find reasonable explanations for everything. But there are two experiences from my past that I simply can't explain away, no matter how hard I try. It first happened back in the summer of '91, just a couple months after I returned from Desert Storm. I was still processing everything I'd seen over there, still having the occasional nightmare. My parents thought a family gathering might help take my mind off things, so they rented this big cabin at Lakeview Resort for a week. It was supposed to be relaxing. Fishing, swimming, catching up with relatives I hadn't seen in ages. The cabin itself was beautiful, honestly. 3 bedrooms, a huge kitchen with one of those farmhouse-style tables that could seat 12 people, a living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. It had this rustic charm with wooden beams across the ceiling and a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. But there was something about it that felt, I don't know, like the air was heavier inside, if that makes any sense. The first couple days were normal. My brother Mike brought a few of his college friends, and we spent most of the time outdoors. My parents were just happy to have everyone together, especially after my deployment. Mom kept fussing over me, making sure I was eating enough, asking if I was sleeping okay, standard mom stuff. It was the third night when things got weird. We'd had a barbecue that evening, and after my parents went to bed around 10, Mike, his 3 friends, and I stayed up at that big kitchen table drinking beers. The conversation eventually turned to ghost stories. You know how it goes when you've had a few drinks and it's late. Someone always brings up something creepy they've heard. Mike's friend Tom was in the middle of telling us about some haunted dorm at their university when it happened. There was a cigarette lighter sitting on the table, one of those cheap plastic BICs, and suddenly, without anyone touching it, the damn thing shot across the table like it had been flicked by an invisible finger. It didn't just fall or roll, it literally launched itself about 3 feet and clattered onto the floor. We all just froze. Tom stopped mid-sentence, and for a few seconds nobody said anything. Then Mike laughed nervously and said, "Okay, who did that?" But we were all sitting with our hands on the table or holding our beers. Nobody was anywhere near that lighter. I got up to pick it up, thinking maybe there was some logical explanation. The table was uneven or something, but as I bent down to grab it, we heard this slow creaking sound from behind us. The china hutch against the wall had a glass door, and it was slowly swinging open. Not quickly, like it would if it hadn't been properly latched, but slowly, deliberately, like someone was carefully pulling it open to avoid making noise. I'll never forget the feeling in that room. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees in an instant. The hair on my arms stood up, and I got this electric tingling at the base of my spine. Mike's friend Chris actually got up and said, "I'm out," and headed straight to the bedroom they were sharing. The rest of us didn't last much longer. We tried to laugh it off, made jokes about the cabin ghost, but nobody was really finding it funny. Within 15 minutes, we'd all retreated to our rooms. I remember lying awake for hours that night, listening to every creak and groan of the cabin, wondering if I was going to hear footsteps or see a door open on its own. The weird thing was, nothing else happened that trip. We didn't talk much about it the next day, just a few nervous jokes at breakfast. I think everyone was embarrassed about how scared we'd been. By the time we left a few days later, I'd almost convinced myself it was just some strange coincidence, an uneven table, an unlatched cabinet door. Almost. Fast forward to 2001. 10 years had passed. I was married by then, with 2 kids. My daughter Emma was 6, and my son Jacob was 4. My dad had passed away the year before, and my mum was having a hard time with it. She suggested we all meet up at Lakeview for a long weekend for old time's sake. I hesitated when she mentioned it. I hadn't thought about that cabin in years, but the memory of that night came flooding back instantly. Still, I couldn't exactly tell my mom I was afraid of a ghost, especially when I wasn't even sure I believed in them myself. And Melissa, my wife, was excited about the idea of a lakeside vacation with the kids, so I agreed. The cabin hadn't changed much in 10 years. Same rustic furniture, same stone fireplace, same china hutch in the kitchen that I couldn't look at without remembering that slowly opening door. But everything felt normal. The kids loved the lake, Melissa and my mom got along great as always, and I started to relax. I didn't tell Melissa about what had happened years ago, partly because I didn't want to spook her, and partly because I felt silly even thinking about it. It was our last night there when the second incident happened. We'd had a busy day, swimming, hiking, making s'mores by the fire pit. The kids were exhausted and fell asleep almost instantly. Melissa and I went to bed around 11. I remember she took my shorts off the bed where I'd tossed them and neatly placed them on the chair by the window. She's always been the tidy one in our relationship. I was almost asleep when I heard something hit the floor with a soft thud. Not loud, just enough to make me open my eyes. Before I could sit up to look, I felt the mattress dip behind me, like someone had sat down on the edge of the bed. I figured it was Melissa getting up to check on one of the kids, but then I felt her stir beside me, and her voice, thick with sleep, saying, "James, did you just touch my leg?" I hadn't moved. I was lying on my side, facing away from her, and my hands were tucked under my pillow. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. "No," I whispered. "I thought you got up." "Something touched me," she said, her voice clearer now, edged with fear. Through the sheet, like fingers pressing down. I reached over and snapped on the bedside lamp. The room was empty, just our suitcases, the dresser, the chair by the window, but my shorts weren't on it anymore. They were in the middle of the floor, like someone had picked them up and then dropped them. Melissa saw them too. "Didn't I put those on the chair?" she asked, clutching the blanket to her chest. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I got up, picked up the shorts, and tossed them back onto the chair. My hands were shaking. "James, what's happening?" Melissa asked. I could hear the fear in her voice, see it in her eyes. I sat back down on the bed and took her hand. "I think this cabin might have a resident," I said carefully. "Something similar happened when I was here with Mike years ago." I told her about the lighter and the china hutch. As I spoke, I realized I wasn't actually afraid. Unsettled, yes. Confused, definitely, but not afraid. Whatever was in that cabin hadn't tried to harm us. It just seemed to want to interact, to be acknowledged. We stayed up for another hour, talking in low voices, both of us too wired to sleep. Nothing else happened that night. In the morning, we packed up and left. I never told my mom about either incident. She had enough to deal with after losing Dad, and I didn't want to ruin her happy memories of the place. Melissa and I have talked about it many times over the years. She's more open to supernatural explanations than I am, but even I have to admit, I can't come up with a logical reason for what happened. The lighter shooting across the table when nobody touched it. The china hutch door opening on its own, my shorts moving from the chair to the floor, the feeling of the mattress dipping, like someone sitting down, the sensation of fingers pressing through the blanket onto my wife's leg. It's been over 20 years since that second visit, and I've never gone back to that cabin. not out of fear, but because I'm not sure I want answers. Some mysteries are better left unexplained, but sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep, I still feel that electric tingling at the base of my spine, and I wonder if whatever was in that cabin is still there, waiting for the next family to come along, ready to make itself known in its small, harmless ways. Whatever it was, I don't think it meant us any harm. It just wanted us to know it was there. Story 22. I still get goosebumps thinking about that night, even though it happened over 20 years ago when I was 11. Some experiences just stick with you forever, I guess. I grew up in this really old house in Spain, like seriously ancient. It survived the bombing during the Spanish Civil War and had been standing for over 100 years. My parents bought it because it was spacious and had character, which is adult speak for weird shit happens here, but the price was good. From the day we moved in, strange stuff was just part of daily life. We'd find the old grandfather clock unwound but still ticking at night. We'd hear footsteps when everyone was accounted for. Sometimes I swear I could hear children laughing when I was home alone doing homework. My parents tried to explain it all away. Old houses settle, pipes make noise, the wind plays tricks, but even they couldn't deny everything. Our bedroom arrangement was pretty simple. I shared a small room with my younger brother Miguel. We had these stacked beds, not quite bunk beds, but mine was higher than his. The room had no windows at all, which made it super dark at night. Just down the hall was my parents' bedroom, and beyond our rooms stretched this long, narrow hallway that led to the kitchen. There was another bedroom halfway down that corridor that would eventually become mine when I was older, but at that time it was just used for storage. The kitchen had this old-fashioned swinging door with a glass pane in it. That door was the worst. When air moved through the house, the glass would reflect shadows and light in creepy ways. I hated walking past it at night. On this particular night, it was a Tuesday in October, I remember, because we had that stupid math test the next day. Miguel was having one of his insomnia episodes. He'd always had trouble sleeping, but that night was especially bad. Around 11, he started getting anxious and restless. My parents had this rule that we shouldn't come to their room unless it was an emergency, but Miguel was practically in tears. "Isa, I can't sleep. I'm going to get Dad," he whispered. I was already half asleep, but mumbled something like, "Whatever, just be quiet when you come back." I heard him shuffle out of the room, and a few minutes later, he returned with our father. "All right, Miguel, I'll stay with you tonight," Dad said in that tired voice parents use when they're exhausted but trying to be patient. I heard him settling into Miguel's bed while I drifted back to sleep in mine. I'm not sure exactly what time it was when I woke up, probably around 3 in the morning, but something had pulled me from sleep. The house was completely silent except for this unmistakable sound of footsteps coming down the hallway from the kitchen direction. They weren't rushed or dragging, just normal, steady footsteps. I froze, staying completely still under my blanket. I could hear my dad's soft snoring from the bed below and Miguel's breathing. The footsteps didn't sound like my mother's. Hers were lighter, quicker, but I figured it must be her, maybe getting a glass of water or checking on us. The footsteps got closer, right outside our open door. I was about to turn over to see my mom when I caught movement from the corner of my eye. A woman walked past our doorway, heading toward my parents' bedroom. She had this curly black hair that bounced a little as she walked, and she was wearing this white nightgown that went down to her ankles. She was tall, much taller than my mother, but I just assumed in the darkness I was misjudging her height. I remember thinking it was weird that Mom was wearing that nightgown because I hadn't seen it before, but I was tired and didn't really think much of it. I just pulled my blanket closer and went back to sleep. The next day was completely normal. I got up, had breakfast, went to school, took that stupid math test, and came home. At lunch, my mom asked Dad, "So why did you end up sleeping with the kids last night?" Dad explained about Miguel's insomnia while I stuffed my face with tortilla española, not really paying attention to the conversation. Then my mom said something that made me stop chewing mid-bite. "If you were already with the children, why did you come to our room in the middle of the night?" I looked up and saw my dad's confused expression. "What are you talking about? I didn't go to our room. I was with Miguel all night." Mom frowned. "Someone came into our bedroom around 3 in the morning. They opened the door but didn't close it. I thought it was one of you checking on me." That's when I felt this cold sensation spreading through my body. "I saw someone walking to your room," I said, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. "I thought it was you, Mom. A woman with black curly hair in a white nightgown." The table went quiet. Then Miguel spoke up, his eyes wide. "I saw her too. I woke up when I heard footsteps, and I saw her walk by. I thought it was Mom." Dad put down his fork. His face had gone pale. I saw her too. I woke up for a second when I heard someone walking. I saw a woman pass by the door, and I just assumed it was you, Maria." He looked at my mother. "But you never wear white nightgowns." Mom shook her head slowly. "I don't own a white nightgown." We all just sat there staring at each other. 3 of us had seen the exact same thing independently and thought it was Mom. But Mom had been in bed the whole time. "Did any of you feel scared?" Mom finally asked. That was the strangest part. I hadn't felt afraid at all when I saw the woman. Neither had Miguel or Dad, whoever or whatever she was. She didn't give off threatening vibes. She just seemed normal, like she belonged there. "She was checking on us," Miguel said with the certainty only a 9-year-old can muster, "making sure we were okay." That afternoon, my parents asked our elderly neighbor about the house's history. She told them that during the Civil War, the house had belonged to a nurse who took care of wounded soldiers in secret. She was tall with curly black hair and supposedly very kind. The neighbor didn't know what happened to her, just that she disappeared near the end of the war. We lived in that house for 8 more years, and weird things continued to happen. Doors would open and close by themselves. Items would disappear and reappear in different places. Sometimes we'd hear humming coming from empty rooms. But the woman in the white nightgown, we only saw her that one time. All 3 of us, on the same night. What freaks me out the most isn't that we saw a ghost. It's that we all saw the exact same ghost, with the same details, at the same time. And none of us felt scared. It wasn't like those horror movies where people scream and run away. It felt normal, like she was just another person in our house. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was a shared hallucination or some kind of mass hysteria. Maybe the house's history was affecting us psychologically. But deep down, I know what we saw was real. The house had other entities too. Whatever made those children's laughing sounds, whatever moved objects around, and those things did scare me. But not her. Never her. It's like we instinctively knew she wasn't there to harm us. I've never had another paranormal experience since moving out of that house. Sometimes I wonder if she's still there, walking those hallways at night, checking on whoever lives there now. I wonder if the new owners feel her presence, or if they've seen her too. To this day, when I visit my parents, they eventually moved to an apartment in the city, we sometimes talk about that night. We still don't have an explanation. We probably never will, but none of us doubt what we saw. That old house taught me that not everything has a rational explanation. Some things just exist in that gray area between reality and something else, something we don't fully understand. And sometimes those unexplainable things aren't scary at all. They're just watching over you in a white nightgown, making sure you're okay.